boy in the first round. David Hughes, a running back out of Boise State in the second round. Jack, let's take each selection one by one. What was your thinking on Kenny Easley?
Well, that's a pretty easy one because we thought Kenny Easley was one of the premier players in the draft. Having such an early pick, we were confident, of course, that we were going to get a great football player, and we were very happy that it happened to be Kenny Easley. I think he's doubtlessly the best defensive back in this league, or this draft. He's a player that not only has all the physical talents you're looking for, I think he's got a great presence or an aura. There's just something about his style of play that I think is outstanding. So we're very happy to have had the chance to pick Kenny.
Why not you Green on that first round?
Well, like I said, we thought Kenny Easley was a super football player, and since we had an opportunity to pick one or the other, and we took Kenny, I think that indicates that we think he's a better football player.
What did you like about David Hughes out of Boise State, a running back in the second round?
Well, the thing about David, he's played under a great program for small colleges over in Boise State. I think that they were either champions or played for the championship. And he's been a contributing factor there. He's a very, very strong fullback. When we first got interested in him, he was supposed to be a great blocker, but the more we looked at him, his pass receiving skills as well as running ability started to be more apparent. So we think we got a football player that is skilled in all aspects of the game. That's his blocking, running, and pass catch.
Jack, thank you very much for spending some time with us on a very important, busy day. Thank you very much. Jack Patera of Seattle. Now let's go back to George Graham.
Thank you, Sal. Jack Patera, head football coach of the Seattle Seahawks. Remember, he just recently got a brand new 5-year contract. They finished 4-12 last year, but still got a brand new 5-year contract. Drafting defense, easily #1 in the first round. We're just about ready for the next pick up on the second round of action. We've already gone through 48 slots. Right. We are on the Buffalo slot now.
Buffalo's made its first selection. We are now starting their second 15 minutes. They are up to be followed by New Orleans. The choice by Buffalo from Cleveland is Chris Williams, defensive back, Louisiana State. Chris Williams, defensive back, Louisiana State. Buffalo is again up for their second choice.
That's Joe Ryan of the National Football League announcing the selection for Buffalo. That's the first of 2 back-to-back selections that Buffalo will have. Chris Williams, the defensive back from Louisiana State. How has Buffalo done in the last few years as far as the draft is concerned? Here's Greg Gumbel.
Chuck Knox and his Buffalo Bills did make an impression in the AFC East. You ask anybody as far as last year is concerned. In the last 3 years alone, the Bills have added 13 starters, 8 of them coming through the draft, and they made some very judicious trades as well. And the statistics tell the story as far as the Bills are concerned. 3 starters from last year's draft, 3 from the year before, the 3 years prior to that, 2, 2, and 4. But they have had their problems. Last year's #1 pick, Jim Richer, made the team, but he didn't start. The big prize last year was running back Joe Cribbs, the running back who turned out to be the AFC Rookie of the Year. As far as mistakes go, well, the premium errors for the Buffalo draft history, take a look. 1979, Tom Cousineau. Really wasn't their fault. Cousineau didn't find Buffalo's offer attractive enough. He took off for Canada, a couple in 78, 1 in 77, and 3 more in 75. By and large, the Bills are doing everything right under head coach Chuck Knox, and with a decent draft this year, the Bills will be even tougher.
There is the fellow that the Buffalo Bills have just selected, 21st in the second round, Chris Williams, the defensive back from LSU, 6 foot, just shy of 200 pounds, pretty good speed in the 40-yard dash, good defensive statistics. Also, kick return specialist, Chris Williams out of LSU, the defensive back selected by Buffalo. Sal?
Let's just backtrack here a moment. In the first round, Buffalo had the 23rd pick, and they traded down. They dealt with the Oakland Raiders. They switched spots. The Raiders, because they won the Super Bowl, had the 28th pick. They switched positions, and Buffalo got the Raiders' #3 pick today, actually the last pick in the 3rd round. Now, what Buffalo did, picking 28th, was grab running back Booker Moore of Penn State, and they've really had to wait a long time, right until now. Here in the second round, they have 2 picks in a row. They've just picked Chris Williams, a defensive back out of LSU. So they have another one coming. And there we had another one of those maneuvers by a club to trade down to get more picks in a subsequent round.
And again, we should tell you, as far as the draft numbers are concerned, we have Buffalo coming up, then the Saints again, Minnesota, Dallas, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Miami. If you're a Houston Oiler fan, you didn't miss anything yet, because the Oilers have not had a draft pick as yet in this 1981 National Football League draft. We'll be back with more of ESPN's live coverage of the 1981 Collegiate Draft from the professional football ranks of the NFL after this word. Back in New York at draft headquarters, we are ready for Buffalo's second pick. Here's Joe Ryan ready to give you the second pick of Buffalo in the second round.
Buffalo is selected. New Orleans is up to be followed by Minnesota. Buffalo's choice is Byron Franklin, wide receiver, Auburn. Byron Franklin, wide receiver, Auburn. New Orleans is up.
The Saints, Minnesota, Dallas, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Miami from Oakland and Los Angeles. That's the rundown of the rest of the second round. Chris Berman is at Mike Minucci's. Let's go back for an update. Chris.
You know, once upon a time, Minucci's, they were yelling for Paul McGuire. We want him. Well, they didn't get him. They only got me. And with me is Frank Ross again at Inside Sports. I know you are. What have you seen since you're looking so hard in the first couple of rounds? First of all, I guess the people in here, Jets, disappointed with the Jets draft, and the Giants a little puzzled with Young, aren't they?
I think the Giants have done well. They need a tight end. But the Jets is total bafflement. Why they would take two running backs when they need defense is just beyond my comprehension. Two things that I've seen so far. The Bears have had a good draft so far. Singletary's a fine player. They need another defensive lineman. And their offensive lineman that they tackle. Yeah. The thing that's going to make them improve is Dick Stanfill is one of the finest offensive line coaches. Keith Van Horn will move in at tackle. They'll take Albrecht and make him a guard. Stanfill, who was the former coach of the Saints, interim coach, and the line coach, goes from coaching a bunch of nobodies to three number ones. And the other thing is New England, the two most important areas in football now because of the rules changes are the defensive backs and the offensive linemen. And defensive backs, the Patriots have 5 number 1 picks, and now with the addition of Holloway from Stanford, they have 4 first round, Kreider, Stan Brock, Pete Brock, and
well, there's no problem with the way the Patriots have drafted. You know, it was kind of Frank, a big draft for Jim Finks. Finks is a guy that obviously knows his football, but the last couple of years, if you look behind the scenes, the Bears, the guys who led them to the playoffs a couple of years ago are really now 4th and 5th year guys. So the last 2 drafts have not been productive. This is a big one for him.
That's right. And they've been living off the 1975 draft that provided them quite a number of starters.
All right, that's some impressions from Minucci's. They're still yelling for McGuire, but we got to go back to the Sheridan.
Thanks, Chris. We may have seen the biggest upset of this draft day. Frank Ross with a tie on. That may be the biggest upset. While we were away, the Saints picked Rickey Jackson, the linebacker from Pittsburgh, the 3rd Panther to be selected so far in this draft. That was the 4th Panther to be selected. That was pick number 23 of the second round. Minnesota is up next. Back at our broadcast center, Paul McGuire is there to talk about Buffalo and to talk about all his fans of Minucci that are looking for him. Paul.
Thank you, George. The only thing that I'm a little bit concerned about Buffalo, they're going almost true to form, except I thought they might take an outside linebacker because of the situation with Kuzno. They just don't know. But Chris Williams, the defensive back, 6 foot, 197 pounds from Louisiana State, they're looking for a defensive back, that's what they were talking about, who is also a return man, and that's something they wanted. Also, Byron Franklin from Auburn. The only question here is he's 6 foot, 177. They say he can fly, and they need an outside receiver. Frank Lewis is getting a little older, so they're looking for another outside receiver. And also, he could be a return man for him. So Buffalo so far is true to form. They got their fullback, Booker Moore. The other thing is I'm really concerned that they did not take a linebacker. I just thought that they might.
Okay, we understand that Minnesota selecting in the 24th position has just selected Jarvis Redwine, so you can pencil in Redwine.
I wonder if Paul Zimmerman still is man.
Yeah, on your Vikings roster. Getting back for a second to the selection that New Orleans made right after the 2 Buffalo selections, and they had that pick because of the deal for Chuck Muncie. Rickey Jackson, linebacker of Pittsburgh, 6'1", 224 pounds, a man out of Pittsburgh, and so many of the defensive players on that Panther team this past year were overshadowed by Hugh Green. But this is a man, Howard, that knows how to cover the pass, as a former tight end, and is seen by the pros as an outside prospected linebacker, outside linebacker.
New Orleans has done very well, I think. As we were saying before the draft, we thought that they would take George Rogers and go for that defensive help on round 2, and that's what they've done. They got a safety in Russell Gary, they got a outside linebacker in Rickey Jackson, and they've got that defensive help in the 2nd round. Still have another 2 picks coming on the 3rd round. So the Saints have done very well so far.
But let me ask you, you had a chance to take a look at Redwine this past year. He has the reputation of the feature back, the man who has to carry the ball to really be effective. Do you think that had to be a factor, getting back to what you've talked about, the intangibles, and his going late in the 2nd round?
Well, he had some injury problems this year, which when it happens to you in your senior year, people kind of forget a little bit that you were, when you first started playing for Nebraska, one of the great runners that they've had in the school history. He's got that breakaway speed, and speed is a dual thing in football. You've got to be able to make the quick moves and accelerate, but if you're out there in the open, then you've got to be able to turn it on and nobody can catch you, and he's got that.
So Redwine is added to Marty McDowell as a selection for Minnesota. Robin Senline, the linebacker, taken earlier. Those are the 3 selections the Vikings have made all in this 2nd round because of various trades. They did not have a selection in the 1st round. We'll check back in live in just a moment at the Sheraton as ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the NFL Draft continues here on the Total Sports Network.
Quarters, we are on the 25th pick of the 2nd round. This one belongs to the Dallas Cowboys the first time around. They wasted no more than 20 seconds before making their selection of Howard Richards, the tackle from Missouri. This time they've gone 3 minutes already into their selection time. After Dallas will be Atlanta, Philadelphia, then Miami of Florida. Miami from Oakland and Los Angeles will get their pick to the final pick of the 2nd round of drafting activity. Again, the last couple of selections, Jarvis Redwine, taken by Minnesota, and Paul Zimmerman. You said they needed some running back help. Is Jarvis Redwine the kind of help they need?
Well, I had them projected for a big back, but you know, it's funny. We all turn into fans, and all of a sudden a name comes up that you really recognize and tune into, and you say, that's a good pick. You know, without really breaking it down and without really figuring that these people have done a lot of research on some of these names that aren't so familiar. But, you know, off the top of my head, sure, Jarvis Redwine, speed back, good pick, and you could see him running for 800 yards next year very easily. I mean, I like that. That's the first Minnesota pick that's really made a lot of sense to me.
Dallas Cowboys went with Richards, the tackle from Missouri, first time around. They have some question marks in the defensive backfield that have to be answered should they go that way this time around.
Well, Dallas, I thought their major problem was linebacker, and I thought that's why they were going to upgrade and wind up with Taylor. I know they have one linebacker, Didi Lewis, who's getting a little older. Hegman has never done it. Brunig is a little bit limited, and this is a team that lives by defense. So, I mean, I would have guessed linebacker. Howard Richards, I'm not quite sure about.
Waters and Hughes in the backfield, too.
Donnelly, wide receiver, right. Ohio State, is the Dallas choice.
We have the Dallas choice, Doug Donnelly.
Followed by Philadelphia.
The wide receiver from the Buckeyes has been selected by the Dallas Cowboys.
Well, you know, Dallas is a team that drafts on the computer and the board and what's coming up there, and they really get away from that need idea pretty much, unless they really upgrade for Tony Dorsett or somebody like that. And they just go along, and I've laughed at a lot of their drafts. I remember when Shaw was drafted, I thought it was a joke, but he stepped in there last year and played very well. So, you know, it just keeps rolling along. They get their share of picks, and they get their computer-type drafts, and the only time they really make a great impression through the draft is when they upgrade and take a superstar.
Okay, up in the rafters of the Grand Ballroom, Leandra Riley with more fan reaction. Leandra.
With me is a police officer right here from New York, William Hicks, and evidently you thought that Mr. Redwine, Jarvis Redwine, would go a little sooner. You know a little bit about his history. Maybe you can share with us some of the people up here who were surprised that Redwine didn't go earlier.
Well, like I said, 2 years ago he was rated one of the top running backs in the nation. I thought he would go much earlier. There's been rumors around the NFL that he had somewhat of a bad head. I don't really know what that means. Maybe he's not coachable, I don't know. But I thought he would go in the first or second round, at latest the early part of the second round. I was hoping he would last until the third. Maybe the Giants would have a chance at him. Unfortunately, Minnesota, wise squall club, just picked him off.
Okay, what do you think of the Dallas selection? They just chose, let's say, Donnelly.
Donnelly is a solid ball player, he's a solid athlete, and as usual, they're a solid ball club. They know exactly what they're doing. They picked the best available athlete possible that was left, and I think, and they can manipulate him and use him someplace else. And they really didn't pick position.
Okay, some intelligent commentary from Officer Hicks.
Thanks, Leandra Riley. There you see the podium here at the Sheraton in New York, waiting now for the Atlanta pick, the Philadelphia pick, and then Miami to wrap up the second round. We'll be back with more of ESPN's live coverage of the 1981 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft in just a moment.
30 years ago today, I don't know the exact day, but draft day, was the #1 pick in a bonus selection. How did that work?
Well, Chris, in those days, you know, normally, as you see it today, the teams draft in the inverse order of their finish. The last place team gets to draft first and so on. But back in those days, I think it's somewhere in the middle 40s, they began what they call the bonus pick. And regardless of how you finished in your team standings, every team had a chance at the bonus pick before they started the inverse order of drafting. And in 1951, the Giants had not won a bonus pick. And the way it worked was that all the teams would reach in a hat, whoever got the bonus pick could make that selection, and then they would start the inverse order. But then that team could not draw the next year. You know, they would have to wait until each team got a bonus pick. So in 51, the Giants still had not received a bonus pick. And Steve Owen reached in the hat and drew out, I guess, the black bean or whatever it was. And they selected me. I think they had finished second behind Cleveland that year in the Eastern Division. So it was a good club I was joining, not, you know, a bottom team.
How does it feel to be a #1 pick? I mean, what does a guy like a George Rogers feel today?
Well, I would say there's a huge financial difference between now and 30 years ago. I would imagine Rogers could pretty well retire on his leverage that he has right now. In those days, it meant a whole lot. Sure, #1, it was a nice compliment to your talent. It was a nice compliment that someone wanted you first. That was probably the nicest part of it, because financially, in those days, it was not that rewarding. But the Giants treated me very fairly and always did. And so I have no qualms about that. I sure wish I were playing today or something like that, or being drafted first today.
How do you feel, Kyle, when you see in a paper or something that, like last year, the Rams were walk out and upset over so much money paid to their #1 pick, and the Giants, there was some article about that, too. How does that's got to dig at you a little bit, saying, gee, the game may not be the same?
Well, I think it's short-sighted on the players' parts who are threatening to walk out, because #1, the more money a Rogers gets or Walker gets for the linebacker role, it's only going to upgrade what everybody else gets throughout the league. So I think it's short-sighted for them to be disappointed about it. And I think it's a fair salary.
Kyle Rowe, thank you very much for being with us here at Minucci's. My pleasure.
Okay, Chris, thank you.
All right, let's go back up to Bob Lee in Bristol.
Thank you very much. I got to wonder, Paul, you sat for 16 weeks on the NFL line-by-line show. You gave all the expertise, yet Berman draws duty in the watering hole, and you're up here in Connecticut.
I think that ESPN finally found a place for Chris Berman, and that's in a bar, because of his picks last year on our line-by-line show. He was so bad. Maybe he's going to learn something, and this year he might be a lot better.
He was right behind Chrysler and applying for a federal loan. I want to tell you, it was Depression City. Okay, round 1. Let's recap everything that's happened since 10 o'clock Eastern Time, when Commissioner Pete Rozelle gavelled everything to order at the Sheraton. These are the picks. If you've just joined us, you'd like to check out your favorite school, a college, or your favorite pro team. Teams on the left, players in yellow if you're watching in color down the center, with the position and the schools, the colleges to your right. George Rogers, the initial selection. Lawrence Taylor, Immediately thereafter picked by the Giants, then Freeman McNeil. Ken Easley going to Seattle. E.J. Jr. to St. Louis. Green Bay going for the quarterback Rich Campbell, while Hugh Green went to Tampa Bay, and the 49ers went for Ronnie Lott. Mel Owens, linebacker to Los Angeles. David Verser, a wide receiver to Cincinnati. Keith Van Horn, the offensive tackle to Chicago, and Randy McMillan, the running back to Baltimore. David Overstreet picked by the Dolphins. The Chiefs selecting Willie Scott, and Denver going for Dennis Smith. Mark Nichols, wide receiver to Detroit. Steelers going for Keith Gary. The Baltimore team traded up with Minnesota, made a trade. Donnell Thompson was their selection. New England next selected Brian Holloway, while Washington went for Mark May. And the Raiders, using their selection in the Casper deal, selected Ted Watts, and the Browns went for Hanford Dixon. Oakland had another trade today with Buffalo. Traded up, got Curtis Marsh, the offensive tackle from Washington. San Diego went for James Brooks. Then Atlanta went for Bobby Butler, and Dallas selected the tackle Howie Richards from Missouri. Leonard Mitchell from Houston went to Philadelphia, and Booker Moore for Buffalo. He was selected today. That deal with Oakland, Buffalo, the last pick of the first round. So far in the second round, Russell Gary, defensive back to the Saints. The Jets, another running back, Marion Barber. The Seahawks going for running back David Hughes, while the Giants went for Purdue tight end Dave Young. Neil Lomax was finally selected by St. Louis early in the second round, while Tampa Bay went for James Wilder. Gary Lewis out of UTA to Green Bay. He's a tight end. The 49ers, off that deal with Washington, selected John Hardy, while Chris Collinsworth was picked up by Cincinnati. Chicago, a minor deal, switching spots with San Francisco, and the Bears went for Mike Singletary, while the Vikings, off the deal with Baltimore, selected next and went for Marty McDowell. The Niners, off the deal with Chicago, went for Eric Wright. Chiefs took Joe Delaney, the running back from northwestern Louisiana. Clay Brown next selected by Denver. Los Angeles, off the trade of Bob Brzezinski to Miami, picked Jim Collins, a linebacker out of Syracuse. Pittsburgh for Anthony Washington. The Vikings for Robin Sendline out of Texas. Curtis Greer was picked up by Detroit. Anthony Collins out of East Carolina, a kick return specialist, went to New England. Oakland, again off the Casper deal, picking Howie Long out of Villanova. Buffalo, off the Alzado deal with Cleveland, the Delamore deal, Chris Williams. Buffalo again, Byron Franklin. New Orleans, off the pick from San Diego, went for Rickey Jackson. It's a mouthful, Jarvis Redwine, next selected by Minnesota, then Dallas for Doug Donnelly. Those are the 53 selections that have been made so far. We hope you have been caught up exactly in what your team has done so far. You might be surprised. It might be right to form, and we'll check back in just a second. Yet to select in the second round, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Miami, which has today conducted a trade with Los Angeles. Those are the remaining turns to come in the second round, where 15 minutes are taken for each selection. As we get now towards rounds 3 through 12, you'll see 3 through 6 today, only 5 minutes per round. And we'll be back to New York City in just a moment after this word here on ESPN.
Tenney's Toyota will pay you to test drive a new Toyota truck. All models are up to $1,000 off, and if you test drive and buy from Tenney's, you'll receive $100 in cash just for taking a Tenney's test drive. That's on top of the super deals Tenney's is making now on all their 1981 Toyota trucks. So come in today for a $100 test drive at Tenney's Toyota at 135th and Lake City Way in Seattle. No wonder they're the oldest Toyota dealer in the entire U.S.
Next season, the Seattle Supersonics will play 90 games in your living room. The Sonic Super Channel offers you all the excitement of every home and away game during the exhibition and regular season, all for only $120. You'll receive free installation and a bonus of over $120 worth of Sonic tickets to see games in person in the Kingdome. Call the Sonic Super Channel, 628-3488.
You'll go nowhere fast without the right information at the right time. Well, Business Week has the information you need to do a better job, win you promotions, earn you raises. And as you move up, Business Week helps you keep up with new techniques, new products, new market opportunities. Business Week, it'll help you every step of the way, all the way to the top. Call Business Week now and save more than $21 off the single copy price. You'll get 20 weekly issues at the low basic rate of only $13.95. And with your paid subscription, you get free this guide to personal business worth $5.95. Whether you're on top or on the way up, call Business Week now, because Business Week means business every week.
To get Business Week in your gift, call toll-free 1-800-228-1600. 20 issues are just $13.95. This basic rate saves you $21 off the cover price. Call 1-800-228-1600.
There we go.
Atlanta has selected Lyman White, linebacker, Louisiana State. Lyman White, linebacker, Louisiana State.
That was just about a minute ago. That was the Atlanta selection on the second round, the 26th player taken on the second round of the draft. Lyman White, the linebacker of LSU, the 5th linebacker taken in the second round. Now, Greg Gumbel is standing by with a look at how the Philadelphia Eagles, who pick next, have done in the draft from a history standpoint.
Philadelphia Eagles head coach Dick Vermeil and his director of player personnel Carl Peterson done a good job with the Eagles. In fact, they have done a great job under the circumstances. They didn't have a whole lot of premium choices the last few years, but they did well with what they had. 4 starters out of the 1979 draft, including Jerry Robinson, and last year's #1 pick, Ronnie Young, was a good one. Premium errors, well, they didn't have that many chances to make mistakes, and they didn't. They didn't have a pick until the 4th round in 1977, and Skip Sharp didn't make it then. In 1980, a 3rd-round pick was forfeited because of player stashing. So they had no premium picks at all during the years 73 to 77. The Mike McCormick regime gave those away. Although last year's draft produced just 2 quality players for the Eagles, they made it to Super Bowl 15 anyway. A good draft this year will almost ensure a return for Super Bowl 16.
Thanks, Greg. The Eagles have just selected. They took a guard, Dean Moraldi, a guard from Utah. That selection just made moments ago. And as it stands right now, the Eagles, through round #1, picked Leonard Mitchell, the defensive end from Houston, and here they've taken a guard, Dean Moraldi. Still to come, one more draft on the second round. That's the end of the 15-minute per selection process. From there on, from the 3rd round on through the 12th round, it will be only 5 minutes for each team to make its selection as we go down the roster. Sal, when you look at how the selection process has gone among the premium teams, the teams that have made it to the Super Bowl over the last couple of years, how do you think they've fared?
Well, we've done some charting here involving the 4 teams in the last 2 Super Bowls, and of the 9 picks they had, 7 were defensive players, and I'll break them down for you very quickly. The Oakland Raiders, who won the Super Bowl, the recent Super Bowl, had 3 picks so far. They had 2 in the first, 1 in the second. And they chose 2 defensive players. Ted Watts, defensive back from Texas Tech, defensive tackle Howie Long from Villanova. They picked an offensive player, an offensive tackle, Curtis Marsh from Washington. The Philadelphia Eagles, who lost to the Raiders in the Super Bowl, had 2 picks, 1 in the first, 1 in the second. They chose a defensive player in the first, Leonard Mitchell, a defensive end from Houston, and a guard, Dean Millardi from Utah. That's the most recent pick. Now we go to the previous Super Bowl. The Rams and the Steelers, both clubs picked, they had 4 players. All 4 were defensive players. We have a pick coming up. Let's go to the roster.
The selection is Andra Franklin, running back, Nebraska. Andra Franklin, running back, Nebraska. New Orleans is up to start round 3, 5 minutes between picks.
Finishing our thought, the Rams picked 2 linebackers, Mel Owens and Jim Collins. The Steelers picked a defensive end, Keith Gary, and a defensive back, Anthony Washington. So all in all, of the 4 Super Bowl teams in recent years, of their 9 choices, 7 were defensive players. If that is a kind of a meaningful statistic, well, so be it.
Okay, as far as the picture of Moraldi is concerned, he's a big one. He's a little over 6 foot, about 245. The guard, the offensive guard from Utah. And just a moment ago, Miami, in their pick, the final pick of the second round from Oakland and Los Angeles, Andrew Franklin, the running back from Nebraska. Let's go back up to the gallery now and see what Leandra Riley has cooking. Leandra.
With me is probably the only football fan that's a female up here. I haven't seen any other woman up here aside from myself and the mother of one of the players. Her name is Maria Davis, and she's from Durham, North Carolina. And if you look in her hand, she's got quite a stack of papers and paraphernalia, and this is to help you in your selection. Who are your sources for these draft picks?
Well, I use the New York Times, the New York Post, and I also use the Daily News. And
26 minutes.
I use a lot of other sources like New York Inside Sports, and Sports Illustrated.
Okay, I can see that the list is going on and on. How come you compile all this? What's the big interest in football for you?
Well, I've always been a spectator of football. I come from the South, and I've liked football for quite a while.
Well, we wish the best of luck to you in your selections. You said you're doing quite well. I know you had an opinion about one team, and that was the Jets. How did you think the Jets did in the first 2 rounds?
I don't think the Jets did very well at all because they really need defensive players. They do not need running backs. They do not need Freeman, McNeil, and I really hope they do not select another running back in the 3rd round. They may do it. I'm not surprised at anything the Jets do now.
Okay, thank you very much. And let's go to Chris Berman now.
Okay, Leandra, thank you very much. If this face is familiar, well, it should be. It belongs to Ron Johnson, the #1 draft pick of the Cleveland Browns in '69, then excelled with the New York Giants. And I guess you're about an 80-yard run from us here at Minucci.
Only a couple blocks away at Burlington Industries, but now we just take nice, quiet strolls instead of dashes now.
I'll tell you, we asked Kyle Rote a bit before about being a #1 draft pick. You're a little more recent, 12 years ago. What was that feeling like when the phone call came?
It was an unbelievable feeling, and I remember the call because I was on hold for about 30 seconds, and you didn't know who had drafted you, and all these thoughts are going through your mind. But it has been a great honor, a great thrill, and it's something that I will cherish all my life, and something you can tell your kids when they ask you, how good were you? You can say, I'm a #1 draft choice. And regardless of what era you're in, they can compare you with whoever the #1 draft choices are then.
Ron, let me ask you this. The 28 guys who went in the 1st round today, compared with the 28, well, there were less teams then, that went in the 1st round in '69, are they much better now coming out of college across the board?
Oh, I think so. There's no question about it. You look at the sophistication of sports medicine, of training today, it's unbelievable. I had an opportunity to go watch the spring game at Michigan a week ago, and just to see the size and the beautiful bodies of all these guys, and we had a lot of little fat roly-poly linemen when I was there, and some slow running backs such as myself, and the talent is just so much more developed than I think it was when I came out of school.
The game just keeps getting better, but I didn't see any roly-poly fat on you when you were playing ball. Ron, thank you very much.
Thank you. Pleasure being here.
Okay, let's go back now to draft headquarters at the Sheraton.
Thanks, Chris Berman. We are through 2 rounds of drafting activity. The 2nd round took 2 hours and 42 minutes. Now, let's go back out to Oakland and see what Ron Barr has in store for us as we get a West Coast picture of this draft.
I'll tell you, if you wonder why you get these assignments, all you have to do, take a look at this guy next to me, Lindsey Mason, offensive lineman for the Oakland Raiders. Lindsey, you are so big. How does any quarterback see over you?
We're fortunate to have a tall quarterback in Jimmy, and always having to pass, so it makes it kind of easy for him to see over us.
I can see, just imagine getting a ball on the back end of the helmet. As you take a look at the draft today, you think back about 3 or 4 years ago when you were drafted. What was going through your mind the draft day as a young college senior?
Well, I was kind of concerned about how I was going to come out in the draft. And from hearing a lot of different rumors from scouts and from different clubs that you'd be picked in this round or that round, there was quite a big deal of skepticism. So I pretty much was kind of excited, full of anticipation about being drafted. But I think the biggest surprise of the day of all is not what round I was drafted in, but being drafted by the Raiders.
How tough is it when you hear that Baltimore is interested in you, Green Bay is interested in you, and then all of a sudden a team that you didn't think was interested in you all of a sudden drafts you?
Well, it's very tough because of the Raiders. At the time, I felt they had probably the best offensive line in professional football, and I thought I was drafted by the team. One is I was happy because it was the Raiders, and the other I was kind of frightened because I felt that my chance of making the team would be very slim.
Let me ask you also, well, we'll get back to that. We have to go back to Bob Lee now on ESPN Central, but we'll talk to Lindsey Mason a little bit more on because I want to know about the seasoning process that the Raiders have, that philosophy. We'll talk to Lindsey Mason a little bit later on. Now let's go back to ESPN's Bob Lee.
Thank you very much, Ron. And a selection just made to begin the 3rd round. New Orleans selecting Frank Warren, the Auburn defensive lineman, 6'4" and 3/4, 275 pounds. As we begin the 3rd round, things happen a lot more quickly. It's 5 minutes per selection. But before we check it now with the ESPN Sports Center newsroom for an update on everything else happening in sports aside from this NFL draft, let's swing around the horn. We are 2 rounds complete. The 3rd round is also considered one of the premium rounds, but When I was growing up not too very long ago, they said when you want to be a baseball player, be a catcher. There weren't a lot of catchers around. It seems to me now if you want to be a football player, become a defensive back, Bud Wilkinson, because they're all over the place throughout this draft profile and now through the draft selections.
Well, 11 of the first 56 choices were defensive backs, and then you had 9 linebackers. From an offensive standpoint, you had 13 running backs. That's a combination of two things. You can't win without great running backs, and also it's the most vulnerable position injury-wise as you go through a season.
High mortality rate also. One mistake, the coach doesn't like it, you're down the road, too. Isn't that the case?
That can happen.
Paul, some of the deals that have been worked around so far after 2 rounds, what sticks out in your mind?
Don Shula again and the Miami Dolphins. Here's the team. They got 2 good running backs, Overstreet and Franklin. But I think the key to that Miami, the whole situation, is the Brzezinski deal that they got from Los Angeles. They got the linebacker they wanted. I think that Shula can talk Brzezinski into play, and he'll do a good job for him. And now it leaves that Delvin Williams is available to become traded.
And again, in the quiet way that typifies the Viking franchise, they are working at it very effectively.
I think they've done very well. I disagree with Paul Zimmerman. He had said he couldn't understand why they traded down from the first round. But anytime you can make a trade and acquire 3 choices, that's what the Vikings did. They traded that number 1, got 2 number 2s and a number 5. So they made 3 selections on round 2, and they ended up with a wide receiver, Marty McDowell. Robin Senline, I think, is going to be a super linebacker for him. And then they added Jarvis Redwine to their running back core. So I think the Vikings have done very well. And I think New Orleans now adding Frank Warren is upgrading their defense. They've taken a safety, a linebacker, and a defensive end. And they've done very well so far also.
We have late word in from New York. Bill Dugan from Penn State has been selected by Seattle. That is the 2nd selection in the 3rd round. So that selection now is noted, and we now have the Giants up next. It's now down to 5 minutes of selection, and it'll happen much more quickly. We'll be back very shortly to bring you up to date again live from New York City and hear from the Sports Center at the Broadcast Center, as well as live from Oakland, California, and Minucci's in Midtown Manhattan. Let's first check in with the ESPN Sports Center newsroom and then back for more live coverage of the NFL Draft here on ESPN.
In Beverly Hills, one of the most famous prize-winning restaurants at the Beverly Hilton is L'Escoffier. Maybe you prefer exotic delights from the Chinese ovens of Trader Vic's, known the world over. All the restaurants and lounges of the Beverly Hilton feature delicacies prepared by award-winning chefs, served in the elegant surroundings of this great hotel. When you visit the Beverly Hilton in Beverly Hills, you'll find outstanding restaurants. They're all around you.
When we tell you Michelin radials last and last...
Well, that's no surprise.
When we tell you Michelin radials save gas...
That's no surprise.
But when we tell you can get Michelins for about the same price as other leading radials...
Now that's a surprise.
But it's true. We're America's fastest growing tire company. We make the tire you need at a price you can afford. See your Michelin dealer and prices set for your car. You'll be pleasantly surprised. Michelin. We put America on radials.
Some folks just can't figure out Campbell's chunky sirloin burger. On the one hand, it's soup, so the feller can eat it with a spoon. On the other hand, it's got all these tasty little burgers made of real sirloin that a feller can eat with a fork. So is it a soup, or is it a meal? Heck, that's easy. Chunky's the soup. It eats like a meal.
Chunky sirloin burger with real sirloin. It's the soup that eats like a meal.
Here's the snap. The ball is down. Dempsey kicks. It's on the way. It is!
Tom Dempsey kicked the longest field goal in NFL history, 63 yards. Red Grange ran his way into the pages of NFL history with men like Jim Thorpe, Bronco Nagurski, and Sammy Baugh. They are all here, the records, the men, the glory, and the memories. And you can see and hear them at the NFL Hall of Fame in Canton, Ohio. Don't miss it.
Ben Rudolph, and he is from Long Beach State. Okay, there is more baseball news. The game in Chicago this afternoon is...
Punter from Michigan State, Ray
Back at the Sheraton in New York, that's Al Ward of the Commissioner's Office announcing that Green Bay has just taken Ray Stackowitz, who was the punter for, during the course of this year for Michigan State. He is the first athlete, as I recall, that has ever made the All Big Ten for 4 consecutive years. Ray Stackowitz, a punter from Michigan State, taken by Green Bay. So on the 3rd round, Frank Warren, taken by the Saints, a defensive end from Auburn. Bill Dugan, a guard from Penn State. He's really been a tackle in college, but the pros look at him as a guard, 6'3", 275. Dugan, the second member of the Nittany Lions crew of Joe Paterno to be tapped so far. Most likely there will be at least one, probably again another one of their fine linebackers. Two of them probably will be taken come the third or fourth round from a linebacker standpoint, but so far 2 Nittany Lions have been selected as well. The Giants took John Missler, the wide receiver from Arizona State. The Jets took Ben Rudolph, a defensive tackle from Long Beach State. St. Louis took Jeff Griffin, a defensive back from Utah. And Green Bay has just taken punter Ray Stakowitz from Michigan State. Next up, the Los Angeles Rams from Tampa Bay. Greg Gumbel has a look on how the Rams have done from a draft standpoint.
The Los Angeles Rams have certainly had their share of turmoil in the front office, perhaps more than any other team in the National Football League. Yet, when it comes time for the draft, the Rams know exactly what they are doing, and the product on the field reflects that. Look at the stats on the Rams in the draft. They haven't been big on acquiring starters from the waiver list or through trades or via the free agent route, but 14 of last year's 22 starters came through the draft, and the Rams have a number of other draft choices who spent a lot of time on injured reserve. Running backs Elvis Peacock and Wendell Tyler, linebacker Bob Brzezinski, who left the team in a contract dispute. Last year, the Rams plucked running back Gerald Thomas on the 3rd round, and they traded up with Cleveland to grab defensive back Johnny Johnson. They have had their share of premium errors over the last 5 years, one in '79, a couple in '78, a couple of more back in '76, but with their talent, they have been able to afford it. But the Rams need a good draft this year because, primarily, the Rams are under a lot of pressure. Quarterback Vince Ferragamo is talking about leaving, and the Rams are no longer the only power in the NFC's West Division, not with the upwardly mobile Atlanta Falcons and the San Francisco 49ers.
The Rams have just made their selection, taking Greg Meisner, a defensive tackle from the University of Pittsburgh. Panthers have had a good draft so far, and while we're talking about the teams so far that have been pulling in the athletes, Sal, how does it tally up?
As the Panthers have had 4 players picked and were in the 3rd round, they had they've had 5 players picked so far. 3 in the 1st round. Hugh Green by Tampa Bay, Randy McMillan by Baltimore, Mark May by Washington. So that's 5 Pittsburgh players picked so far, and we are in the 3rd round. As far as the 1st round is concerned, Southern Cal led the way with 3 players. Ronnie Lott was the 8th player picked overall by San Francisco. Keith Van Horn was the 11th player overall picked by Chicago. And Dennis Smith was the 15th player overall picked by Denver. Looking for other trends, Auburn has had 3 players picked, only one, however, in the 1st round. That was James Brooks, a running back by San Diego. South Carolina, of course, had George Rogers, the 1st pick overall, followed by tight end Willie Scott, who was the 14th player. He was picked by Kansas City. UCLA has had 2 players picked quite early, and that's been it for UCLA. Freeman McNeil, the running back, picked by the Jets, was the 3rd player overall. Ken Easley, right behind him, the 4th player overall, a safety picked by Seattle. Alabama has had only 1 player picked. That's linebacker E.J. Jr. by St. Louis. And how about them Dogs? Number 1, Georgia, hasn't had a player picked yet.
I'm just tallying it up as you were going through it, and as I recall, on the basis of the opening day rosters now, the University of Southern California with 40 athletes, 37 coming into the draft as far as representation is concerned. Oklahoma with 33, Penn State with 32. Those are the top 3. USC with 40, Oklahoma with 33, Penn State with 32.
Yeah, if Montreal takes Herschel Walker, does that count as a player pick?
Right, yes, for sure.
They might take Bill Lee before it's all over.
That's right.
But it's like racing stables. You always go to the leading stables because they have the best trainers, and I guess they keep going back to the well, to USC, UCLA, and Pittsburgh.
The Cincinnati Bengals are next up, the 8th pick on the 3rd round of drafting activity. The 3 through 12 rounds are all 5 minutes per selection as opposed to the 15-minute, so this should wrap up a little bit more rapidly. Paul Zimmerman, as you look at the 2 full rounds now of drafting, how do you evaluate it?
Well, the Jets reversed their trend, didn't pick a running back in the 3rd round. They went for Ben Rudolph, who is a rarity these days, a great big guy who does not lift weights. Maybe if they put him on some sort of a real disciplined program, he'll hit his potential. That's been the knock on him. He could do it, but he hasn't really so far. He's kind of a guy that good coaching could bring out. That could be a good pick for them. Giants taking John Missler. I haven't heard anybody say a bad thing about John Missler.
I agree, right.
Yeah, very, very solid player. The only knock on him is that he's not a real burner deep, and that's God-given. That's not no fault of his. But everybody I talked to said he could fit in any pro game. Good, solid type player.
Here comes the pick from the Cincinnati Bengals, the 8th pick in the 3rd round of drafting. Cal Ward.
Cincinnati picks John Simmons, defensive back from SMU. John Simmons, defensive back, SMU. We have San Francisco up, followed by Los Angeles Gent with a choice from Washington.
2 more defensive backs here in the 3rd round. All told so far, 12 different defensive backs have been selected, and so far, 13 different running backs have been selected. John Simmons, a defensive back from SMU, selected. Simmons checks in at just shy of 180 pounds. He's not very big, but he's regarded as a wiry kind of athlete. While we're talking about wiry athletes, one person that has not been drafted so far, that is somewhat of a surprise to me, and I know he's not the fastest athlete in the world, I know he's not the biggest athlete in the world, but Kenny Margarine of Stanford has demonstrated he has that intangible. He can catch the football, he can get open, and he's a winner.
You know, first thing people say when we talk about Ken Margarine is he's another Randy Vitaha. George Young once said, if there's one religion that these people have, it's Hindu. They all believe in reincarnation. And, you know, Vitaha lasted for a while, never made a great name for himself, was a fairly decent player, but they all say that he's another Vitaha. I don't know what that means. I thought Randy was a pretty good player, and I think this kid will be too.
While we were discussing Carlton Williamson, the defensive back from Pittsburgh, so the Panthers add another one, was selected by San Francisco. Carlton Williams, the defensive back from the University of Pittsburgh Panthers, selected as the San Francisco pick. Carlton Williamson of Pittsburgh selected as the defensive pick.
Continuing with Paul's thought about speed, going back to the end of the 2nd round, when the Dallas Cowboys picked the wide receiver Doug Donnelly, who's 6 feet, 180 pounds, they picked him strictly, if I go by the scouting reports, because of his speed, because of the rules changes. They call him White Lightning, and is that the trend now, to get wide receivers strictly on speed rather than catching ability or blocking?
Well, I think you get what's there. If the best receiver is fast, fine, but you don't take a worse player because he happens to be faster. You want somebody who will fit into the overall picture of the passing game.
We have a pick going on right now.
The Los Angeles Rams have just taken Bob Cobb, who is a defensive end from the University of Arizona. That's the Rams pick. The 10th pick, this was in the Washington deal, the 10th pick, Los Angeles from Washington, a defensive end, Bob Cobb, Robert Cobb, a defensive end from Arizona, selected by the Rams on the 10th slot in the 3rd round.
I think we should point out that the Rams are a team that have lost their quarterback, supposedly had a shaky running back situation, and the first 4 picks are all defense. But I think Klosterman is right in the sense you do win on defense.
Okay, let's go back up to the gallery and see what's cooking with Leandra.
I have a celebrity of sorts with me. He picked 21 out of 28 warm bodies that were correct, and then he picked 9 actual correct picks, names for teams, in the Earl Campbell draft. And as a result for that distinction, you won what, and what happened to your life after that?
Well, it was pretty exciting. I won the first prize that year was 2 tickets to the Super Bowl. And I was written up in the New York Times and the Boston Globe and the Philadelphia Inquirer, and I had a lot of friends after that. A lot of people wanted to come with me to the Super Bowl. But it was real exciting when they announced my name, and Pete Rozelle went downstairs and they announced it in front of everybody here, and they were really excited for me. All my friends were here, and it was a great day.
Okay, Mike Eisenberg, you're obviously very knowledgeable about football. He's been at about 8 drafts now. Why is this draft more exciting than other drafts?
Well, this year's draft, there's a lot of quality players. In most years, you have about 10, 12, maybe 15 players that are sure starters for their teams. This year, they can go deep into the 2nd round, and some players in the 3rd round could start right away for their teams. It's a very deep draft. There are a lot of good players. Early rounds, the first 15 players were exceptional. Probably the best 15 players picked since I've been here my 8th year in a row.
Okay, if I can challenge you for one more question, why do you think there's such a heavy emphasis on defense in these first 3 rounds?
Well, in football especially, just like in all sports, defense is very important. all championship teams, no matter what the sport, have great defenses. And when you have great defensive clubs, you can win. Just stopping the other guy, that's most important.
Well, that's a fan expert if I ever heard of one. Let's go to Sam Rosen on the floor.
Thank you very much, Leandra. I'm here with Dave Klein of the Newark Star-Ledger, longtime reporter covering the New York Football Giants. The Giants have been down for so many years, Dave. Are these draft picks today going to help them?
They couldn't hurt when you draft that high. As a matter of fact, I think most teams had Lawrence Taylor as the first player on the board, and New Orleans was in a position where they had to have a running back, and I think the Giants were aware of that and were rooting for that. They wanted Lawrence Taylor. They won't even come close to admitting it, but I think if they had the first pick, they would have taken Taylor also. He has to help. He's very big. He's enormously fast for a man that size. He's intelligent and very coachable, and he's probably going to be an instant starter. The second-round pick was a little bit mystifying. The Dave Young, was kind of downgraded during his senior year. They said he dropped the ball. They said he didn't have enough real speed. But they timed him in a very good speed, just under 4.7 in the 40. And he certainly is big. He's 6'6" and almost 250. He'll at least have a chance to win a job. The tight end situation with the Giants isn't automatic. The third round is, again, a little bit puzzling. I think they're going for best athletes because of all the positions where they need help. I think wide receiver is not one of them. But perhaps it gives them a trading access now also.
What do you think about that theory of going for the best athlete, or should they draft for need? Should a team go for the need and fill those positions that, fill those holes that have been gaping for a long time?
Well, ideally, it should be a combination, especially high in the first round. If there's a player that good, you'll find a place for him to play. If he also is at a position that you have a desperate need for, all the more better. I think in the case of Rodgers and Taylor and McNeil, almost whatever you need, you have to take them and then hope you'll get what you need in the second round. They're just too good to pass up.
What's your general assessment of the draft thus far, the teams who may have significantly improved themselves?
I think Baltimore did a fantastic job in the first round. They told me last Friday they wanted Randy McMillan or Donnell Thompson and were afraid they wouldn't get either one of them. And as it turned out, they got both, which is absolutely fantastic for them. They'll both help.
A lot of defensive backs have been drafted. Any reason why?
It's a rare commodity when you can find one who can play cornerback or safety or both, as has been the case with many of these players. And again, it's a need to go with the strength of the draft. When there are a lot of defensive backs around, you better take them now because maybe next year there won't be any.
Thank you, Dave Klein, Newark Star-Ledger and reporter covering the New York Giants. Let's go back to George Grant.
Thank you very much, Sam Rosen. As we were just talking about Kenny Margarine, he was just selected by the Chicago Bears, the wide receiver out of Stanford from the Bay Area. So we are into the third round. 67 players have been selected so far in this National Football League day of drafting through 2 rounds and 11 into the third round. 13 running backs, 13 defensive halfbacks, and 9 linebackers. That ranks among the top selectees so far. 13 running backs and 13 linebackers for the first 2 rounds plus of balloting. 67 athletes have been taken thus far after 67 selections, Paul Zimmerman. Ken Margarine finally does get selected from Stanford. How do you evaluate it to this point?
Well, I evaluated that Jimmy Scott signed in Montreal. They better get themselves another wide receiver. They have 2, one of whom is a possession-type receiver, Brian Bashnagel. The other one, Ricky Watts, can go deep, but they better get somebody else who could go fairly deep.
Baltimore comes up next. That's what we're waiting on here at the Sheraton in New York as we continue ESPN's live and exclusive coverage of the 1981 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. There's still to come. We'll be heading back to Oakland to see what's transpiring there with Ron Barr. We'll also be checking in at our broadcast center to see what's transpiring with Bob Lee and company. We'll be back with more of the draft coverage in just a moment.
They're playing a pro game.
Well, and you've had all of the experience running the routes that you're going to run. They're exactly the same, and you'll pick up a little more skill as you go against better defenders. And that's a big difference, of course, between playing in college and playing in the NFL. The men that you're running against, There just aren't any weak ones out there, so Marjoram will have to sharpen his skills a little bit.
Well, Marjoram out of Stanford. Let's check exactly what that selection has meant now in the western part of the country. Chicago has drafted Ken Marjoram. Let's go out now to Ron Barr, who's live in Oakland, California, giving us an eye not only what the world champion Raiders are doing, but what this draft means to everybody in the western divisions of the AFC and the NFC.
Let me tell you about Ken Marjoram. I've watched him for 4 years. He's set most of the receiving records, erased Gene Washington's records, Randy Vataha's records. He is just an outstanding athlete. He was expected to go a little bit higher, I think, than, well, a little bit higher at least in the second round. He has great concentration. He runs excellent pass routes, and he has a great set of hands, and he can really, really jump. I think the thing that probably hurt him and not going sooner was his size. He is listed at 5'11", 166 pounds. But I think if there's to be a diamond in the rough of the 1981 college draft, it'll probably be Ken Marjoram as he goes to the Los Angeles Rams. Thinking back just about a year from now, you guys back in New York were saying the Oakland Raiders' #1 draft pick for the 1980 draft is a young man out of BYU by the name of Mark Wilson. And Mark is with us right now. Mark, as you think back to the Raiders system of bringing in the young player, let him sit on the bench a little bit, learn the system, and then putting him in. Is that a good system, or do you get kind of itchy sitting on the bench and wanting to get out there and see full action?
Well, you get itchy, but that's to be expected. I think in the long run, it's much better to gain the experience by watching the veterans, the older players doing it that way, especially at quarterback. So I'm very happy and pleased with the situation I'm in here in Oakland.
Let's talk about the rest of the AFC, the guys you're going to have to face. Denver twice, Seattle twice. Has any team that you've noticed improve themselves with their draft picks today?
Well, to be honest with you, I haven't paid much attention to the draft. I remember a year ago, of course, that was the only thing on my mind. But Seattle with Easley, that'll make a difference in our passing game. I think he's an excellent athlete and very much proven in college, and I'm sure he'll do a good job there at Seattle. But I'm really not aware of the other picks, to be honest with you.
You came in as a youngster, and the veterans came to you. What do they tell a young Raider player when he comes and tries to make this team? What advice do they give him to help him a little bit?
Well, mostly it's to have patience. There is a big transition in this game, regardless of what other people may believe, from college to professional football, and to be patient, give yourself the opportunity to learn, and go from there.
What about the Raiders system? Is it difficult? Is the offensive system difficult? Does it take more than one season to be effective?
Well, I think so. It took me 2 or 3 years to get it at BYU, and this is professional football again, and so I think I have to expect it's going to take the same amount of time here. Hopefully I'll pick it up faster because I have more to base it upon, but it'll take time. There's no doubt about it.
By the way, we've just been told that Kenny Marjoram did not go to the Los Angeles Rams, but he went to the Chicago Bears, so we correct that right now. But Marjoram is a fine receiver. Now let's go back. I'm Ron Barr at the Oakland Raiders headquarters.
Thank you, Ron. And while we were around in Oakland, California, if you were watching your screen, the Baltimore Colts with their third-round selection, the 12th pick in that draft, selecting Randy Vanderveer, the offensive tackle from the University of Washington, 6'5", 279, the 5'1" speed for this huge, very developed young man, very good at the point of attack, a good run blocker, and a man who can leg press nearly 700 pounds. We'll keep an eye on him in action, number 79, Paul.
Well,
700 pounds.
Yeah, 700 pounds. You're going to be able to move some of those big defensive tackles out.
With his legs?
Yeah, well,
he bench presses 450.
You know, I like that as far as drive blocking is concerned on the running game. But the question is, you know, when you get into the pros, you want a guy that can also pass block, and that's why you see guys going further down the list that are offensive tackles instead of up in front. What they look in the pros first, can you pass block? Because one thing in college, you run more than you do pass. And they know that they can run block, but can the young man hold his own as far as his big defensive tackles and ends come on?
Let me ask you, but is there an optimum size for an offensive pro tackle you would like to see, considering, or is it an individual matter? Or is there a size at which you say you
well,
pretty much have it nailed down?
Normally speaking, if you're too tall as an offensive lineman, you're likely to be somewhat top-heavy. Football is a game of a low center of gravity, and of course now your weight related to your size keeps you from being top-heavy. The taller you are, the heavier you must be. But I would say an optimum would be around 6'3" or 6'4", weighing about 260 to 280, kind of like Dan Deerdorf.
Or Howard Balzer.
That's right.
Selection that was next up was originally Denver's. They have forfeited that selection. That came down not too long ago. A very stiff penalty.
I thought it was a stiff penalty. What happened with the Broncos was Bill Thompson was a free agent last year, the February 1st free agent. Of course, did not receive an offer from another NFL team when they never do. We know that. Then the Broncos informed him by June 1st that yes, they would indeed have take the option of signing him. Well, he had not officially signed a contract when the Broncos played their first preseason game, and they played him in the game anyway. And so the league took away a third-round pick. There's no doubt the Broncos were wrong in doing that. The guy was not signed to a contract. I just thought the third-round penalty was a little steep, considering the Green Bay Packers in recent years once got away with an allegedly illegal tryout involving Dwayne Thomas. In 1979, they did not report an injury to place kicker Chester Markle to the league, and they were just fined money in that case. So it seems ironic to me that you could do something like that and only be fined, and yet the Broncos are fined a third-round draft pick.
Okay, we understand that there has been a trade in the third round. Washington has selected Russ Grimm. They traded with Los Angeles. We'll get those full details on the trade in just a second. Russ Grimm selected by the Redskins. Let's check out Mr. Grimm's statistics out of Pittsburgh, the big center. In fact, the first center chosen today, 6'7", 250, a 5'1" speedster. Let's get back for a second, talk about Ray Stakowicz, who finally we've had a kicker selected, a specialist, and this has not been a banner year. Stakowicz goes, and all right, let's talk to the ex-kicker. This man, Stakowicz, out of Michigan State, Paul, is known as a foul weather man. The weather, and it really can't bother you playing in the Big Ten, but it plays no problem. He's had 6 punts over 60 yards.
And he's also going to fit in very well because he's going to Green Bay, and you can't have any worse weather than you have in Green Bay. He is an excellent kicker. And I talked to the Buffalo Bills because they were kind of down on Greg Cater at one point during the year. Would they go for a kicker? They said that they would not even consider taking a kicker of any sort in the first 4 rounds. But Stakowicz is an excellent kicker. There's just no question about it. And as you said, if he can handle foul weather in Michigan or Michigan State, he can sure handle the foul weather at Green Bay.
He's got a net average of about 43.5 yards a punt. Trouble, if there is a thing he has to work on, is directing that ball, keeping it away from certain kick returners. But there was a question whether he was the best punter available. Of course, Rex Robinson is still out there as a place kicker as well. Kansas City is next up. But kicker Bud really has to be a sterling kicker to go well up into the draft. The Russell Erxleben case just bears on the mind of anybody. He was a bust for the first year and a half.
Well, it's very hard to win unless you've got a great one, and Ray Guy, I think, really personifies what a truly great kicker will do for a football team. He'll give you field position, and he'll keep you from ever being backed up.
Let's backtrack just a tad, if we can, back to the Cincinnati selection in the third round. John Simmons, cornerback, was selected out of SMU, leading his team in interception. Also a very good punt return man. He has returned a couple of punts this past year for touchdowns. The question about Simmons, whether he might be tough enough, but he does have great anticipation. Watch these highlights. He wears uniform number 34. 7 interceptions this past year. He was drafted today by Cincinnati.
He's going to help the Bengals. They needed help in their secondary. They took 2 wide receivers on the first 2 rounds, which was something of a surprise. Verser, of course, was the obvious choice. They then grabbed Collinsworth on the 2nd round because Don Bass, their wide receiver, tore up his knee last year and is still not walking very well. So now they've gone the defensive way, a defensive back, another one, and he's got to help the Bengals defensively in the secondary.
Again, just to recap what has transpired on this third round, we understand there has been a trade between Los Angeles, which had acquired a selection as the 14th selection in the draft, originally from Miami. Today, Washington with a trade. They selected the center out of Pittsburgh, Russ Grimm. We'll take a very short business break, and when we come back, we'll check back in at the draft headquarters, see exactly what is happening, what that trade has meant, and what is happening as we get towards the latter stages of the third round. Live coverage of the NFL draft, exclusively here on ESPN.
All right, in the other selection that was just made, the 17th selection in the third round, Detroit has taken Don Greco, a guard from Western Illinois. Standing by with Commissioner Pete Rozelle. Let's go to Sal.
Thank you, George. We're here at draft headquarters in New York with Commissioner Pete Rozelle. We've had a number of inquiries from viewers. They want to know, supposing a graduating senior doesn't like the team that picked him, what option does he have?
Well, one, he has the option, of course, of going to Canada, which some of them do. But if a player is selected in the draft and he just sits out, he doesn't go to Canada, doesn't do anything, then the second year he goes back in the draft again, right from the top. And if he does not, again, if he fails to sign, in other words, he set out a total of 2 years, then he's a free agent. He can go with any club he chooses.
And that original team that drafted him has no rights?
No rights, right.
Okay, we're in the midst of the third round. We've had some machinations by teams for trades. What's your overview of the draft so far?
Well, I think that from what all the clubs say, you know, and you people have said here, it goes very deep. And I think that's why you had some trading of first draft choices, swapping of first draft choices where a club could pick up an extra third for changing positions. Because I think they feel that they've got pretty good players down there they can get too. And so for picking up an extra choice, it was worth it. I think that's the key, that it's a deep draft. And this should help our weaker clubs, actually. They've got a good chance to improve themselves because they're picking earlier in each round. And as each round goes and you still have solid players available, it should give them, with intelligent drafting, a chance to improve themselves very quickly.
The last time I looked, there was at least a dozen defensive backs picked. That's either there's a load of defensive backs or the rules changes have affected the draft.
I think it's the latter. I think since we put in that package of rule changes helping the offensive passing game in '78, all clubs have developed an awareness of the importance of finding guys to stop them, too. So you saw, with 4 or 5, I guess, went on the first round, and we've had, about a dozen so far. And I think that with the success of some teams' passing games, that's just placed more of a premium on defensive backs and linebackers.
Okay, thank you very much. Commissioner Pete Rozelle is spending some time with us. Let's go to Oakland and for a report on the West Coast view of the draft so far.
Thanks a lot. Out here with us is Ron Wolf, who's the Director of Player Personnel for the Oakland Raiders. And Ron, have you been surprised with what tactics some of the teams have taken in this draft? Has it gone just about the way you thought it might?
I think the top players, Ron, have gone pretty much the way we thought they would. However, there are some movements going on right now that are a little hard to understand.
Let's talk about the AFC Western Division, the division that the Raiders find themselves in. Any team improve themselves with their draft?
Oh, I think very definitely. Anytime you only have so many picks, as everyone knows, in a draft, and I think anytime you can get quality players, for example, Seattle with Easley and Denver with Smith and Kansas City with Scott and Delaney. I think San Diego, I left them out, but they have James Brooks. I think they've improved themselves.
Let's talk about San Diego. Needed defense. They couldn't stop you guys in the playoffs, and they take on the first round an offensive running back.
Well, that remains to be seen what they're going to do with him. I have no idea. There's a possibility that always goes in the back of my mind. Maybe they're thinking about him for defense. I don't know.
Let me put this idea into your head. It's probably 6 hours after the draft, and you sit back. Will you be smiling, chuckling, or will you be saying, I wonder if I could have gotten that one player?
Oh, I tell you what, after this day's over with, you're just smiling, chuckling. That's about it.
Tell me about the guys that you picked, the defensive back and the Marsh more than anything else, and Watts as well. How are they going to help the Oakland Raiders?
Well, I think Watts and Marsh and Long will all help us from a depth standpoint. Watts in particular we felt was the top corner in this draft, and we think in a couple of years he'll be able to step in and play for us. Marsh is a big offensive lineman. It is a young man that probably has a couple of years of development that's necessary. We think he can go on and continue the tradition that's been here. And Howie Long is one of the 4 youngest players available in this draft. And we think also, you know, for looking at it from a youth standpoint, that he has a good future. So it's not an instant starter type situation. It's more backup or key reserve type situation. Hopefully they'll grow with us.
Okay, quick question. You don't flip coins back there making the decisions for the Raiders, do you?
No, but we throw darts.
There you heard it from Ron Wolf, the Director of Player Personnel for the Oakland Raiders. As they get ready, they do not have a number 3 pick. Now let's go back to New York and George.
Back in New York from North Carolina, Rick Donnelly, an offensive guard, has been selected by Pittsburgh, the 18th pick. Don't forget, in addition to our coverage live of this National Football League draft, we'll have live coverage tonight of the WCT Championships from Dallas. John McEnroe against Sandy Mayer this evening as we continue our quarterfinal action. Tomorrow, it'll be Tanner against Vijay Amritaj, and on Thursday, Wojciech Feedback against Johan Creek. The semifinals are set for Friday. The finals will be set for Sunday. Again, if you're just joining us, we are in the 3rd round of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. Just selected, Pittsburgh has taken Rick Donnelly, an offensive guard from North Carolina. Detroit, before that, took Don Greco, a guard from Western Illinois. Somewhat surprising, I think, and at least in my estimation, I think we could talk about this a little bit from the Kansas City standpoint. 3 picks so far, 2 tight ends, Harvey and Scott.
I know. It surprised me very much. I would have thought definitely in the first 3 picks there'd be an offensive lineman, a tackle, unless they have one of the tight ends as a lineman projection, I can't see it, though. I mean, Scott is a pure tight end. Harvey is a speed finesse type of guy. And unless they think they can interchange them or work a two tight end offense, of course, don't forget that Marv Levy's the guy who tried to go back to the wing T formation, junked that after a year. But that's one of those stunners that jumps up in the draft.
That's Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated, who has been adding his expert commentary with our staff here in New York, as well as our staff at our broadcast center with Bob Lee, and as well as Ron Barr in Oakland. In case you joined us a little bit late, this all started at 9:30 this morning Eastern Time, 6:30 Pacific Time. The first pick of the day came at 10 o'clock. That pick belonged to the New Orleans Saints. Bum Phillips had said all along he would go with George Rogers. This is what George Rogers had to say.
I don't really know what to say, you know, under all of the circumstances. I'm too excited really to say anything. New Orleans chose me, and I'm sure going to give my best, and that's 100% every time I go out on the field. And I'd like to thank everybody here for you know, for the hospitality that they gave me so far. In New Orleans, I'm coming.
I'm a lazy lout who is just about to stop. But baby, I'm the bottom, you're the top.
Michelob brings you the 7-day weekend, California style. In California, they don't follow trends, they set them. So people out here don't wait for the weekend to have a Michelob. They enjoy that smooth and mellow Michelob taste whenever and wherever they please.
Put a little weekend in your week. You got something in the mail, son?
Oh boy, it's from the NFL. It's my NFL Super Pro Club membership kit.
Announcing the new NFL Super Pro Club, the league's official youth program. It's fun, educational, and will stimulate boys and girls' interest in NFL football. When you join, you get a lot of great things. A membership card and membership certificate, a T-shirt transfer, 3 informative newsletters, decals of your favorite team, an official Super Bowl poster, a Super Pro Club flying saucer, 3 exciting NFL books, a big NFL standings board. For further information on how your child can participate in the club and to find out about the membership fee, write NFL Super Pro Club, Post Office Box 9000, Trenton, New Jersey 08650. That's NFL Super Pro Club, Post Office Box 9000, Trenton, New Jersey 08650. It all begins in 1981.
The Grand Ballroom at the Sheraton Hotel in New York City. We are into the 3rd round of the National Football League Player Draft of 1981. If you're a Houston fan, you have yet to see a draft. The Oilers will pick the 80th player available. That will come 4 draft selections from now. They will pick 24th in the 3rd round. What has transpired so far? You saw the George Rogers announcement where he was named #1 by the Saints. This is the way the 1st round went. The Giants took Lawrence Taylor, the linebacker out of North Carolina. The Jets then took Freeman McNeil, the running back of UCLA. That sent some shock waves through the stands here in New York because there were a number of Jet fans that wanted defense. We did go to defense, though. Kenny Easley was taken by Jack Patera in the Seattle Seahawks, a defensive back of UCLA. E.J. Jr., Esther James Jr. III at the 14-minute mark of the draft was picked by St. Louis, the linebacker out of Alabama. Green Bay took the first quarterback of the draft, Rich Campbell from California. Hugh Green, the man who was regarded as the best athlete probably in the entire draft, but because of his size was not picked as the first linebacker. In fact, was the 3rd linebacker, but a great competitor and a sure linebacker in the professional ranks of Pittsburgh. Hugh Green became the first of so far 6 different Panthers to be taken. San Francisco took Ronnie Lott, another defensive back from USC. The Rams in that swap with Washington, picking 9th, took Mel Owens, a linebacker out of Michigan. David Verser, the wide receiver of Kansas, was taken by the Cincinnati Bengals. Keith Van Horn, the Chicago Bears, gobbled him up, the offensive tackle from USC. Randy McMillan, another running back, this one from Pittsburgh, taken by Baltimore. David Overstreet, the running back from Oklahoma, was also selected by Miami, 13th. And Kansas City took Willis Scott, the tight end from South Carolina. That's 1 through 14 in the first round of drafting activity. The Denver Broncos then took Dennis Smith, the defensive back from USC. Detroit picked Mark Nichols, a wide receiver out of San Diego State. Keith Gary, a defensive end from Oklahoma, became the first defensive lineman to be taken. That was by Pittsburgh, the 17th selection in the first round of the draft. Then it was Minnesota trading their pick to the Colts. The Colts took Donnell Thompson, the defensive tackle out of North Carolina. New England selected Brian Holloway, a tackle out of Stanford, an offensive lineman. Washington, then selecting in Los Angeles' slot after that swap of picks, picked Mark May, an offensive tackle for Pittsburgh. It was Oakland in the Houston deal from last year taking Ted Watts, the fourth defensive back selected from Texas Tech. Cleveland picked Hanford Dixon, the defensive back from Southern Mississippi. Buffalo traded its pick with Oakland. Curtis Marsh was selected, an offensive tackle out of Washington. The Oakland Raiders selected him. San Diego then took James Brooks, the running back from Auburn. Also, the Atlanta Falcons took the sixth defensive back to be selected in the first round, Bobby Butler, the defensive back out of Florida State. Dallas then took just 30 seconds to decide on their pick, not utilizing the 15 minutes allotted to them. Howard Richards, 6'5", 260, an offensive tackle out of Missouri. Leonard Mitchell, the big tree, one of the half of the bookends from Houston, the defensive end, was selected by the Philadelphia Eagles. Buffalo then took the first Penn State athlete to be selected, Booker Moore, the running back for the Nittany Lions. That's the way the first round went. The second round, the Saints again picking first, took Russell Gary, a defensive back from Nebraska. Marion Barber was selected by the Jets, the running back of Minnesota, again sending some cheers and some boos through the crowd here. Again, that same offense versus defense feeling of the local fans here in New York. Seattle went offensive for its second round selection, took David Hughes, the 220-pound running back out of Boise State. Dave Young, the tight end of Purdue, who caught all those passes that Mark Herman threw at Purdue, was selected number 4 in the second round by the Giants. Neil Lomax became the second quarterback selected. The St. Louis Cardinals took Lomax, the great quarterback who set all those NCAA all-division records from Portland State. Tampa Bay then picked James Wilder, the running back from Missouri. Green Bay took Gary Lewis, the tight end from Texas Arlington. San Francisco, in a swap from Washington, picked John Harty, the 260-pound defensive tackle from Iowa. Chris Collingsworth was also selected by Cincinnati, the wide receiver from Florida. This again came on the 10th selection of the second round of the draft today here in New York City. Chris Collingsworth from Florida State, that by Cincinnati. San Francisco then, in a deal with Chicago, got into the action as well. The Bears taking Mike Singletary, the linebacker from Baylor. Minnesota, and a selection from Baltimore, took Marty McDowell, the wide receiver out of Mississippi State. Eric Wright was selected, the 12th person selected on the second round. This from San Francisco. The 49ers took Wright, a defensive back from Missouri. Kansas City took a running back their second time around, Joe Delaney, the running back. That selection out of Northwest Louisiana. That's Joe Delaney. Clay Brown, the number 14 selection. The tight end out of Brigham Young University, a tight end, also a very fine punter as well. Los Angeles, in its selection from Miami, took Jim Collins, a linebacker from Syracuse. Pittsburgh then took Anthony Washington, a defensive back from Fresno State. Minnesota, selecting 17th on the second round, took Robin Centline, a linebacker from Texas. It was Curtis Green, taken by the Detroit Lions, the defensive end from Alabama State. In New England, the Patriots selecting 19th in the second round of competition. The Patriots then went out and selected Anthony Collins, the running back kick return specialist from Eastern Carolina. Howie Long was taken by the Raiders, the Oakland Raiders, in their deal from Houston, the 265-pound defensive tackle from Villanova. Buffalo, in a deal from Cleveland, took Chris Williams, the defensive back from LSU. Also in the second round, the number 22 pick, Byron Franklin, The 177-pound wide receiver out of Auburn was selected. The number 23 pick. The Saints from San Diego took Rickey Jackson, the linebacker out of Pittsburgh. Minnesota then selected Jarvis Redwine, the running back from Nebraska. Dallas then took Doug Donnelly, the wide receiver from Ohio State. The Atlanta Falcons then took Lyman White, the linebacker from Louisiana State University. And the Philadelphia Eagles then had their selection up next. They took Dean Moraldi, the guard from Utah. Miami took Andrew Franklin, the running back from Nebraska. That wrapped up the second round, and we are now in the third round. So far, in the third round of drafting in round number 3, the way things have developed, the New Orleans Saints took Frank Warren, the defensive end from Auburn. Seattle took Bill Dugan, the guard who has played tackle at Penn State through his career but is expected to be a guard in the pros. The Giants selected John Missler, the wide receiver of Arizona State. The Jets took Ben Rudolph, the defensive tackle from Long Beach State. The St. Louis Cardinals, drafting 5th in the third round, took Jeff Griffin, the defensive back from Utah. Green Bay selected the first specialist punter kicker. It's Ray Stackowitz, the punter from Michigan State, all Big Ten for 4 years. Los Angeles from Tampa Bay took Greg Meisner, the defensive lineman from Pittsburgh. The Cincinnati Bengals then took John Simmons, a defensive back from Southern Methodist. San Francisco then picking 9th in the third round of drafting to Carlton Williamson, a defensive back from Pittsburgh. Los Angeles then selected Robert Cobb, a defensive end from Arizona. The Chicago Bears, looking to replace James Scott, picked Kenny Marjoram, the wide receiver of Stanford. Then Baltimore was making their selection. They took the tackle from Washington, Randy Vandiver, the 6'5", 279-pound tackle from Washington. The 14th selection, the 13th selection was forfeited by Denver. The 14th selection, there was a trade here. Los Angeles sending 5 draft picks to Washington. The Rams will get the number 1 pick next year in the 1982 drafts. Washington getting middle round picks. They took Russ Grimm, the 250-pound center from Pittsburgh, the 6th Panther athlete to be selected so far. Kansas City picking 15th in the draft. On the second round of action, it took Marvin Harvey, the tight end of Southern Mississippi. New Orleans then took Hobie Brenner, the tight end from USC. Detroit took Don Greco, the guard from Western Illinois. Pittsburgh took Rick Donnelly, the offensive guard from North Carolina. Minnesota then took Tim Irwin, the tackle from Tennessee. And Sal, I know there were 2 other selections while I was running these down. Why don't you fill us in on those?
Okay, the 20th pick in the third round, we're still in the third round, belonged to Denver, but the Kansas City Chiefs traded running back Tony Reed to the Broncos for the Denver's third-round pick this year and a fourth-round pick next year. So what happened was the Chiefs picked Roger Taylor, a tackle from Oklahoma State. Buffalo picked next, and the Bills chose Mike Mosley, a wide receiver from Texas A&M. Mosley is the second wide receiver the Bills picked today. The suspicion is that the Bills are trying to get some depth behind Frank Lewis, who's getting older at that position. Then San Diego chose 22nd here in the third round, and they picked Irvin Phillips, a defensive back from Arkansas Tech. That brings us completely up to date at this point. A word from Paul Zimmerman. Paul?
One thing I noticed, a very good trend. The league is now announcing what the trades are. In the old days, they used to say future drafts, which drove us crazy because it comes out within 2 days anyway, and you just have to do more work, and you know, clubs didn't want to be embarrassed. But now they're saying a number 2, a number 4, a number 3. It's no set policy. It's just a very strong suggestion by the commissioner, but I hope this trend holds. It's very helpful for us.
We have not checked in for the last few minutes with Ron Barr, our man who is on the West Coast, to keep us abreast of what is happening there. Let's go back to Oakland, where Ron Barr is about ready to keep us appraised of what's been happening there.
Thanks a lot, George. The pace here at the Oakland Raiders training headquarters, where they're conducting the draft, is slowing somewhat as we move into the middle rounds, you might say. I finally found somebody I can interview that I don't have to stand on a ladder or at least a chair, and that's Willie Brown. So that ought to tell you the guy is certainly not a defensive lineman. He is a defensive back, or at least was one of the all-time greats, all-pro cornerback for the Oakland Raiders, now a defensive backfield coach. Ted Watts was the #1 choice in that first round for the Oakland Raiders. Willie, it's going to be your job to mold him. What was it that the Raiders saw in him that they liked?
We saw quite a few things. I guess mainly we saw his speed and his quickness. I got a chance to watch him on film some, and I said right away, hey, that's the guy for us, because knowing that what we need somewhat, and knowing that you don't find many guys with his capability.
So we figured that going after him, we could fit into our organization quite well by being a cornerback position that I played such a long time. And I see him having no problem at all playing the cornerback position. Then from there, I looked at him on a highlight film somewhere, and I saw how he's able to hit, you know, come across there and really put some hits on guys. So I knew right there he had the combination of two things. He could be a corner or either safety. So you got those two things together, so he'd make one good ball player.
What about that third thing? You haven't had a chance to talk to him to see what his mental approach is to the game. Are you looking forward to that, and what do you expect out of him from there?
No, not really. I haven't talked to him, but some of the guys have talked to him on the phone from here, and he's really excited about coming with the Raiders, and we don't see any problems, and he thinks he'll fit in quite well with the organization. And I'm sure that, you know, with his ability and his speed and things that goes along with all the things that he does have, he'd be #1 Raider here.
Willie, you could probably tell us better than anybody about the two picks that went to the West Coast team. San Francisco taking Ronnie Lott, Kenny Easley going from UCLA up to Seattle. What about those two players? Can you categorize how good they really are and what they'll mean to those two teams?
I think both of those guys would be in the Pro Bowl within a year. Believe me, easily one of the best I ever seen, and Lott sure to measure up to those standards also. I don't see within a year those two guys should be in the Pro Bowl. Guess that type of ball player they are.
They're the type of guys that can really make a franchise and put them back on their feet, aren't they?
No doubt about it. Those guys, they really have all the capability of putting any defense together, believe me, because with their hitting ability and their speed and their strength and, you know, fit into the mold of those two organizations, I don't see any problem with him.
Well, listen, after Mark Wilson and Lindsey Mason, you're a glad welcome to interview. I can talk to you eye to eye. That's Willie Brown, the all-pro cornerback for the Oakland Raiders, now a defensive backfield coach. That's our report here from Oakland. We'll be back and continue with our 1981 coverage of the college draft right after these messages.
You ain't nothing but fine, fine, fine. You ain't nothing but fine, fine, fine. Fine, fine, fine.
Who's on First with Sports Wednesday? ESPN with live coverage of WCT Championship's quarterfinal action from Dallas. Second-seeded Roscoe Tanner squares off with BJ Armitage. If you watch SportsCenter, you can't say I don't know when you're asked who's the ex-second baseman that has the first-place A's playing great Billy ball. What better way to follow Auto Racing 81 than to stay tuned to NASCAR action from Martinsville, Virginia? We're trying to tell you it's a great ESPN Wednesday of total sports.
The winningest team in the North American Soccer League last season makes its ESPN debut Saturday as the Seattle Sounders shoot it out with the tough Vancouver Whitecaps live. The Sounders and the Whitecaps are currently battling for the lead in the NASL's Northwest Division. In action for Seattle will be league MVP Roger Davies and the North American Player of the Year in 1980, goalie Jackie Brand. Saturday, live at 11 Eastern, 8 Pacific. It's time for the NASL on ESPN. Join us.
Radar. It tells you where you are and what's ahead. If you're part of today's complex business world, you need a magazine that does the same. And here it is, Fortune Magazine, your business radar for the 80s. Fortune looks ahead, scans the business world, and makes news with fast-moving stories. Stories on marketing, government, technology, finance. Now you can have your own copy delivered every 2 weeks to your home or office for less than half the cover price. 19 issues for $21.97. To order, call toll-free 1-800-621-8200. Call now, and you'll get the famous Fortune 500 issue free, the authoritative ranking of America's top 500 companies. The call is free, so dial 1-800-621-8200. It's up to you. You can get a look at what's coming in Fortune, or you can just wait for it to happen. You're on a tough course. Can you afford to wait? Call now.
Back in New York, the headquarters of the draft is Sheridan. Let's go to Pete Rozelle.
Those of you attending the draft know that we have a contest each year to determine the individual who can pick the largest number of first-round selections. This year, we had 191 of you participating. The grand prize winner of the 1981 NFL Draft Contest, and he wins out on a tiebreaker because 4 of you properly selected 25 of the 28 first-round selections. So we go to the tiebreaker. One individual, the winner, selected 9 players properly with the teams taking them. His name, from Long Island City, New York, Bruce Kahaner. Bruce, you want to come down? All right. Bruce picked 25 of 28. He also properly matched Rogers with the Saints, Taylor with the Giants, McNeil with the Jets, Campbell with Green Bay, Verser with Cincinnati, McMillan with Baltimore, Scott with Kansas City, Gary with Pittsburgh, and Dixon with Cleveland. The winner, Bruce Kahaner, will receive 4 tickets to the Super Bowl. He'll get 2 reserve seats for next year's selection meeting, and he'll receive an NFL watch. All right, those who lost out in the tiebreaker, and there were 3 of them, and they'll each receive 2 reserve seats for the selection meeting next year and an NFL watch. And they were as follows: Keith Miller, Dan Lieberfeld, and Charles Trucillo. Now those 3 properly picked 8, just 1 less than the winner, Kahaner. They had 25 right, and they matched 8 properly with their teams. The other runner-up, let's see, Miller and Lieberfeld had 8. I'm sorry, Trucillo had 6, so they all 3 tied. So we'd like to have all 4 of them come down if they're here. Bruce Kahaner, Keith Miller, Dan Lieberfeld, and Charles Trucillo. Congratulations, Bruce.
How did you do? 11?
He said he'd planned it all along, and let's hear his success story.
Yes, well, this is what I came for, and I was pretty sure I was going to win this thing when I came here. And actually, I changed the order at the last minute, adding some players, and turned out pretty good, I guess. That's about it.
Congratulations. Good.
That's
Bruce Kahaner. Bruce, first of all, how old are you and where do you go to school?
I'm 18 years old. I go to Manhattan Community College right here in New York City.
And the question that's burning in everybody's mind, what's your secret?
Well, I didn't go by what teams needed, but I went by the what I heard from different experts, and I put that together, adding as many players as I could, and then subtracting from the extra players and taking for instance, David Overstreet was on more first-round lists than Marty McDowell, so I would add him as my extra player, and I cut down on all the variables to get down to the proper 28.
Do you know 3 people who might want to go to the Super Bowl with you next year or this year?
Well, I have a couple friends that had to go to school today who left. I told them to stay, but their names are George Campasulis.
Well, I'm sure that they're friends from school and everything. If you have an extra ticket, a kid with red hair and freckles can't be all bad. We'll be back with more NFL Draft right after these announcements.
Buffalo with a choice.
Something new is coming this year. There's a new kind of excitement. A new kind of magazine. Coming to you from the National Football League. Turn Pro. For a look at the hard-hitting action. The color captured by top photographers. The in-depth stories that take you behind the scenes. The personal angle, the strategy and the planning, the new trends in the game, and the great moments of the past. Nobody shows you pro football the way Pro does. From the inside, we're in the NFL. Pro puts you in contact with the entire league. Not just the top stars, but the top coaches. The key men on and off the field. For an inside look at professional football, turn pro. Your first look is free. Call 1-800-453-9000. We'll send you the premiere issue in August. Give Pro a tryout, then decide. Be sure to take down this number because Pro is not available at newsstands. When your trial copy comes, read and enjoy the new kind of magazine from the NFL. And to keep Pro coming for a full season, just pay the invoice that comes with it. You'll get 7 monthly issues, August through February, a full Pro season for only $18. Send no money now. Just call 1-800-453-9000 and turn pro.
Only 2 selections remaining to be made in the 3rd round of the 1981 draft. Philadelphia and Buffalo will be checking back in from time to time in New York to tell you exactly what's happening as we get down towards the 4th round. And it's pretty much generally agreed that this is a 4-round deep draft and that you have 4 quality rounds of athletes available. But it's going on 2 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, Pacific Daylight Time in Oakland, California. Let's get a couple of final thoughts from Ron Barr out in Oakland, how the Raiders have fared and how things have gone generally in the West for the NFC and the AFC teams. Ron, what are some of your final thoughts on this draft day?
Well, George, as we take a look at the draft board right behind us, the thing that comes to my mind is Mel Owens, which was taken by Los Angeles in the 1st round. A little bit of a surprise there. But also, I think the AFC Western Division will be much improved in this coming season, primarily because Seattle certainly did get the man they felt that they needed to have in the defensive secondary in Kenny Easley. Also, a little bit of a surprise was that James Brooks was taken by the San Diego Chargers in the 1st round when it was thought that while they could move the ball very well last season, they couldn't stop anybody in key situations. So it was thought that San Diego would probably take some type of defensive player. They did not. The contrary side, the opposite side, might be at Denver, where they were looking to maybe revitalize that offense, try to get some more points. That's always been Denver's problem. They've been able to stop people, but they haven't been able to score enough points to win the type of games they need to. So you thought that they might go ahead and take an offensive player, a running back. They certainly were very interested in McNeil, Freeman McNeil, but of course he was not available since the Jets took him. So they take Dennis Smith, a defensive player. Certainly will help because he is a good one. Across the bay at San Francisco, the thinking was we need defensive secondary people, and Bill Walsh came up with the player that he wanted. There was cheering, as we heard earlier from columnist Art Spander in the decision room there, when they thought both Easley and Ronnie Lott would be gone before they got to the 8th choice in the #1 round. However, when they did get there, there was Ronnie Lott, the USC product, and they got him. So they're very happy over there. They've also drafted some help along the defensive line. That will help the San Francisco 49ers. Here at the Raiders headquarters, it's all smiles because they didn't really need anybody. What they did was they went out and got the young backup help that with a little bit of seasoning, a little bit of training, and a little bit of help from the veterans that the Raiders have, they'll be able to move into those starting positions in 2 or 3 years. So the Raiders got everybody they want. The 49ers staff is smiling. Patera's got to be smiling. The same as I guess can be said for San Diego and Denver. So out here in the West, everybody seems to be pretty happy with the first day's action. That's the way it is. Now let's go back to our ESPN headquarters and back to Bob Lee.
Thank you very much, Ron, and let's update you on exactly what has happened on the next to the last selection in that 3rd round. If you were just watching with us, Greg LaFleur, the offensive guard from LSU, has been selected by Philadelphia. That coming at the end of the 3rd round. One more selection, of course, belonging to Buffalo by virtue of that earlier deal with Oakland. So the Florida State guard, Greg LaFleur is selected. So let's take just a short business break. When we come back, we'll recap exactly what's been happening, some of the people not in this draft, and also some of the trades that have gone down today. Draft Day 1981, live and exclusive coverage right here on ESPN.
Dave, a little one-on-one. I had to do some yard work for a Michelob Light. I don't have to do any yard work.
Would good friends really go at it this hard just for a beer? Well, consider it's Michelob Light, and that means a rich, smooth taste you can compare to any beer you like.
102 to 98. How did you do it? Defense?
Michelob Light. Compare the taste.
When I found out how affordable Michelin radios were, I thought they were putting me on. Well, as it turns out, I'm putting them on.
I came in here expecting only to have enough for my second choice, but
He put me on to Michelin for about the same price.
If anyone tells you Michelin quality is too expensive, they're putting you on. Price Michelins. Only our standards are high.
I found out Michelin prices are really competitive. So that's what I'm putting on.
Michelin. We put America on radials.
A lot of people get all confused about Campbell's Chunky. Take this chunky vegetable beef. On the one hand, it's a soup, so a guy can eat it with a spoon. On the other hand, it's got all these chunks of beef and potatoes and vegetables a guy is able to eat with the fork. So is it a soup or is it a meal? Let Joey solve this. Chunky is the soup that eats like a meal.
Chunky vegetable beef. It's the soup that eats like a meal.
We're going to take you on an impossible business trip. 26 cities in 25 seconds. You'll find an airport Hilton in every one of these cities. So the next time you have an impossible business trip, remember Hilton. We can make an airport a great place to get your feet back on the ground. Another reason why when American business hits the road, American business stops at Hilton, America's business address.
Great show. Back in New York at the Sheridan Draft Headquarters for the 1981 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are at the tail end of the third round. Buffalo has the final selection of the third round. We are waiting on that one at this moment. That will wrap up 3 rounds of drafting competition. With Sal Marciano, we are very pleased to say, is a very familiar name and an individual who, of course, has also, before we go,
from Oakland picks Robert Geithers, defensive tackle, South Carolina State. That's Robert Geithers, G-E-A-T-H-E-R-S, defensive tackle, South Carolina State. Leading off round 4 will be Miami, using a choice from New Orleans, followed by New York Giants and the New York Jets.
There you have the final selection of round 3, the defensive tackle from South Carolina State, Robert Geithers. Now to Sal Marciano and Dave Anderson.
I spend my breakfast every morning with the New York Times, and its columnist, Dave Anderson, is here. Dave, here in New York, there's been lots of controversy today because the Jets used their first 2 picks for running backs, despite the fact that they had such a porous defense last year. As one who's watched the Jets for since their birth, what is your opinion about what they did today?
Well, I'm sure that they at least think they know what they're doing, Sal. To me, they've always had a problem at running back, even though they also have a problem on defense, because they haven't had backs in recent years that they could really depend on for a big play. Clark Gaines has been a very useful back, so have many of their other backs, but they haven't been able to get a big, long play out of their backs, and they think that naturally the Freeman McNeil will do it, and I think they also need a big fullback. They haven't had a big fullback, and even though the people here, the draftniks as we call them, booed the choice of Marion Barber from Minnesota, if he can play as well as apparently the Jets think he can, they certainly need a big fullback.
Let's go to the very first pick, George Rogers, Heisman Trophy winner, New Orleans. Bum Phillips uses his first choice for obviously a terrific running back. What was your opinion of that as opposed to perhaps trading the choice for bulk of players?
Well, as far back as the Super Bowl, which is about the time that Bum came to New Orleans, we were down there and we heard that at that time that most football people thought that Bum would go for George Rogers for the simple reason that he will use him the same way he used Earl Campbell in Houston as his workhorse back and build his offense around him.
Who's your column going to be about tomorrow morning?
Well, it's just kind of a general draft column, a draft situation column.
You know, people, we read your column, we don't realize how many hours it takes, but I know you've probably been working on that column about 6-7 hours.
It's all done now.
Okay, nice to see you. Dave Anderson of the New York Times. Let's go to Sam Rosen on the floor.
Well, and with me is the beloved Swami. And how did the Swami do today?
Well, over at Minucci's, I guess we had a couple of drinks spilled on my turban, but otherwise unruffled.
How'd the draft go? How'd the people react over at Minucci?
They seemed pretty positive about the Giants draft. Some were concerned about Young, the tight end, the second-round pick, is blocking, but they liked the opening pick of Taylor. Jets, well, you heard it here. It was a lot louder. Jet fans were a little disgruntled. I'm disgruntled, too, as a Jet fan.
Why is that?
Well, I think that they're the Red Sox. They're trying to score 8 runs, but the problem is with no defense or no pitching, you're going to give up 9, and I just fear that they're going to give up too many points even though they're going to score 35. McNeil's a great pick, but why Barber? Barber may be a great player, but Sam, I'm disappointed as a season ticket holder, but they have their reasons.
You don't think Gastineau and Lyons will develop sufficiently?
Oh, no, they're okay. Linebacker, why not Hugh Green to go with a Buttle and a Blinka? That sounds pretty good to me. And they could use some help at the corners, too. I mean, they like Darrell Ray and Schroy at the safeties, but I really don't feel they needed that much in the backfield. But Gaines and Harper must be hurting. Mike Hickey must have his reasons for doing what he did.
We were talking about the third round and a move the Denver Broncos made, a deal they made with the Kansas City Chiefs.
I like that. Tony Reed, who led Colorado, the Orange Bowl in the Bill Mowry days. Tony Reed's now going back to where he played college ball, or close to it. He played in Boulder. Now he's going back to the Broncos. Now, he had a good rookie year with the Chiefs. He hasn't been doing much, been beat out for a job there in that wing T. But I always look for a college player who has proven himself that he can do it in the pros, going back to where he excelled in college. I like the deal for Denver. Dan Reeves is going to make some good offensive changes. I like the Bears getting Marjoram in the third round, too.
It's a little early, but what's the Swami's assessment? Who did well in the draft?
Oh, it's too early. I got to sit down and really figure it out. We're battling some irate Jet fans for me to really sit down and study. What's your assessment? What do you think?
I like the Baltimore Colts, and I also like the Oakland Raiders. I really thought the Raiders made a couple of good picks.
I'll tell you, I think the Atlanta Falcons have addressed their problem. The first 3 rounds, 2 of them have been defensive backs. Glazebrook, they have a question about it, and Pridemore, too, although he can do it. That's where they got beat last year. If they make the adjustment in the defensive secondary, I've already cursed you, Falcons. I've already said you're going to be in the Super Bowl this year. So you address the problem, I think, with defensive backs.
Good day for Chris Berman, the Swami over at Minucci's. Let's go back to George Grant.
Thank you very much, Sam and Chris. We just had a Giant selection. Clifford Chapman, the running back from Central State out of Oklahoma, has been selected by the Giants on the 4th round. Cliff Chapman, the running back out of Central State in Oklahoma. Back at our broadcast center, Bob Lee and company are ready with more commentary as we continue our live and exclusive coverage of the 1981 National Football League Draft. Bob?
Okay, George, we are 2 selections deep now into the 4th round. Just to recap, for those of you that might have just been joining us, principally the key trade right now that has not been involved in the draft, in other words, it may look forward towards the future. Washington has traded its 1982 #1 pick to Los Angeles for 4 Ram choices, 3 of those this year, 1 of them in the 3rd round, 2 in the 5th round. Los Angeles' own 5th round selection and the 5th round pick they have through Green Bay, as well as the #2 pick that Los Angeles has next year. So Washington giving up that #1 pick next year for those 4 selections. Other trade, Kansas City sending Tony Reed to Denver for Denver's 3rd round pick and also a 4th round pick next year. The New York Giants have just made a selection of Clifford Chapman, the running back out of Central State in Oklahoma, 6'1", 222, as you've seen. So the Giants, as we had been discussing for the ground game, let's keep an eye on Chapman here on our highlights, make a move. And this may illustrate, Bud, the fact that some of these players now, as we get down towards the stage of the draft, might be those personnel directors' secrets. Chapman was not a secret, but he goes here early in the 4th round.
Well, everybody has a very good feel of who the truly blue chippers, if you want to call them that, are. Then when you get into the later rounds, at that point, they think they know something that other people do not know. And whether that's true or not is questionable, but there isn't any doubt that they make up their own mind very, very strongly, and then they don't talk about it.
Here's a man with brute power, raw tools, a question about whether the head is there to assimilate the pro offenses and really get involved in the pro offense, but he's got the running ability. He also has the receiving capability.
And the interesting thing, like Bud was saying, on these later rounds now, we know that it's important what you do throughout the entire draft, and with only 5 minutes, you don't have that much time to think about it. You got to make your decision pretty quickly.
The initial selection in the 4th round belonged to Miami via a deal with New Orleans, and the selection made was Sam Green, the wide receiver out of the University of Nevada at Las Vegas. They call him the Disco Kid, 6'1", 186 pounds, a big play man, most dangerous once he gets his hands on the ball, known to taunt his defenders, and really has, I guess, the makeup you're looking for in a big play ball player.
Miami doing well.
Yeah, Miami's doing extremely well. And here's a guy, you're seeing him now on Sam Green on the end of round, a wide receiver round. He, like you say, once he gets the football, he is very dangerous. You can see the moves he makes to get to the outside. It's the kind of guy you like to have. He could be a sleeper. And the other funny thing is the guy that Buffalo took in the 3rd round, the last guy, Robert Githers from South Carolina State, 6'6", 261, and on their scouting report, and the 140 guys they invited to Dallas, he was not one of them.
That might be one of those personnel director well-kept secrets we were chatting about, that no one's really going to hear that name mentioned about, part of the smoke screen.
That's right.
But earlier we had talked about, obviously, the good programs coming to the fore, and you put together some numbers through the first 3+ rounds that showed that Jackie Sherrill's boys are well represented here.
Well, not only well represented, they've got some problems coming up next year. 7 Pittsburgh players were chosen in the first 3 rounds, and if you want to put that in percentages, it's approximately 8% of the people chosen were from the University of Pittsburgh in the first 3 rounds of the draft.
Also in the Keystone State, what they call linebacker U has a good linebacker, but Larry Kubin, Howard, is not in this draft. He could have possibly done so, but he elects now to take that redshirt year.
That's right. He was injured in the 3rd game of the season last year, and he hadn't decided just this last Wednesday. He made his decision to play another season at Penn State. He'll be graduating, by the way, with his degree in June, and will be playing as a graduate student next year for the Nittany Lions.
As you see, Al Washington from Ohio State, the selection just made by the New York Jets. Let's backtrack just a little bit, if we could, to some of the selections late in the 3rd round. Scott Werner, out of Georgia, selected by Atlanta in that 3rd round, the 25th selection overall. Here's a man who's all SEC as a cornerback, a decathlete. Has had knee surgery, but again, a big play man defensively, and also returns the pass, and really is the only Georgia man that we really have been talking about so far today, Paul.
You know, it's amazing. The #1 team in the nation gets one guy. And the reason that he went so far down is because of the knee surgery, and they're just not sure whether his knee is going to respond or not. But he is a tough football player, and he'll hit you. He likes to play the defense. You know, he's the kind of guy that you can use as a return man, but also if you need a defensive back somewhere in the nickel defense or in the position where in a prevent situation, you can use this young man.
He's one of those guys I think that's a winner. One other interesting thing, Notre Dame hasn't had anybody selected.
Seattle, as we've just noted, has selected Scott Phillips, the wide receiver from Brigham Young University. Again, BYU with that prolific offense being well represented here today. So wide receiver Scott Phillips out of BYU, drafted by Seattle. St. Louis is up next, followed by Tampa Bay. Howard, correct me if I'm wrong. According to my computations, there have been no deals made today that right now will affect the 4th round. I think everybody will have the picks that they had coming into today as far as the 4th round is concerned.
That's right. They've stayed away from the 4th round. One player we might look for in this round, as possibility hasn't been drafted yet, is Amos Lawrence, the running back from North Carolina. He's still available. And the one thing in this whole draft that I'm still stumped on is Kansas City taking 2 tight ends. But I wouldn't be surprised with a guy like Marvin Harvey, who's got the great speed. He can go deep. He's only 6'2", 225, and he could be used possibly as a wide receiver in certain situations for the Chiefs.
And again, to read the fine print right across both of our chests, Steve Rhodes, he of the miracle catch in the bowl game, the wide receiver out of Oklahoma, selected by St. Louis. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are up next, and we'll be back here. There are about 48 minutes left to go of our live and exclusive coverage of the first day of the National Football League draft. We'll step aside for a business word and come right back for more live check-ins with New York and hear from the Broadcast Center on ESPN.
Tenney's Toyota will pay you to test drive a new Toyota truck. All models are up to $1,000 off, and if you test drive and buy from Tenney's, you'll receive $100 in cash just for taking a Tenney's test drive. That's on top of the super deals Tenney's is making now on all their 1981 Toyota trucks. So come in today for a $100 test drive at Tenney's Toyota at 135th and Lake City Way in Seattle. No wonder they're the oldest Toyota dealer in the entire U.S.
Next season, the Seattle Supersonics will play 90 games in your living room. The Sonic Super Channel offers you all the excitement of every home and away game during the exhibition and regular season, all for only $120. You'll receive free installation and a bonus of over $120 worth of Sonic tickets to see games in person in the Kingdome. Call the Sonic Super Channel, 628-3488.
Here since early this morning, fans started lining up outside the Sheraton Hotel in New York early this morning. In fact, after 4 o'clock this morning for a chance to get in and watch this 46th edition of the National Football League Collegiate Player Draft. We are now almost 8 hours plus, 8 hours 15 minutes into the draft itself. And we are winding down, having completed 3 complete rounds of drafting activity. We are into the 4th round, just beginning the 4th round of action. The fellow who has been on the floor of the Grand Ballroom, keeping us abreast of the different team and player representatives as the afternoon has gone on, is Sam Rosen. He now has Val Pinchback. Sam.
Thank you very much, George. And with me is Val Pinchback, Director of Broadcasting for the National Football League, and he's the man who assisted us in putting this whole production together, and really a tremendous effort on the league's part, working in conjunction with us.
Well, we're very pleased with what's happened again this year in meeting televised. It's been a long day for everybody, and you guys are going off the air in a while. We've got a few more hours, but we're particularly pleased to be with ESPN again this year, and we know that all the hard work from Scotty Connell, Bill Fitz, and the guys in the truck, and all the rest of you fellas here is very important. I think it's great for our fans.
It's certainly, I think, going to be something almost like an institution. Every year it's going to be there. I think it's a great program, and you can see by the enthusiasm, the interest of the fans involved.
Well, we certainly feel that way, and more of the clubs this year tried to take advantage every way they could of the fact that the draft is televised, trying to bring it in for the media in their area where they can. A couple of the clubs have brought it into malls in their particular area for their fans, so we think it's a fine promotional thing for the league at this time of the year as well.
Val, thanks a lot for helping us out.
Thank you so much.
Okay, let's go upstairs for some more fan reaction, and Leandra Riley.
And with me is a native of Brooklyn, New York, and a Giants fan. What's your reaction to the Giants' performance so far today, Mark?
Well, they've done rather well. They haven't done as well as they could have done with all the high picks in each round, but Lawrence Taylor, a super pick, maybe the best player in the draft. They got Dave Young in the 2nd round. He's led the nation in pass catching last season. He should move right in at tight end. A couple other picks, John Meisler from Arizona State, big wide receiver. He should be able to, come in and help now and then. And even the Giants' latest pick on the 4th round is Clifford Chapman, not too well known, but he's a big husky back, and he could ground out the yardage when the Giants need maybe 1-2 yards for first down, and that's something they've been lacking in recent years.
And Mike, you did pretty well on that 1st round selection. You had 24 warm bodies picked correctly, and of that 10 you matched up perfectly to teams, so obviously you know your football. But the friends that you came here with, did they agree with you about the Giants' performance today?
Well, basically so. I think that some of my friends actually thought the Giants did better than I thought they did. They did well, but they could have done better.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike Barnes, who works for Sports Phone, and let's go back to George and find out more about the 4th round in the draft.
Okay, Leandra, thank you very much. We've talked not only all day today, but we've been talking for weeks and months about a concept of drafting. Some individuals have maintained that they like to draft the best athlete available, the Bucko-Kilroy philosophy. Other individuals and teams have indicated they like to draft for a need. What were the teams in this draft, Paul Zimmerman, that drafted for the need, and what were the ones that disregarded the need?
Well, I'm trying to piece together my chart now, team by team. New Orleans had the worst defense statistically last year. After Rodgers, they picked 3 in a row defensively. San Francisco, 27th defense last year. First 4 picks all defense. They make no bones about it. They're going for a need, and they're getting it. Now you've got somebody like Minnesota. They were 3rd from worst in the league in defense last year, surprising as that might sound. And 1, 2, 3 of their first 4 picks were offensive players, and only Robin Sandline was defense. Now the picks don't look that bad, player by player, but you question the concept. Jets, tough luck defensively last year. They take 2 running backs. Okay, they have running backs who are hurt, but you've got to stop people. I have heard scouts say that the worst mistake you can make is to take your depth chart into the drafting room, and then you neglect the good athletes. But I think you have to go for need every now and then too, especially when it's defensive need, because you just have to stop people.
What were the biggest surprises to you on this first day of the draft?
Oh, I don't know. I think that LA didn't trade and get that Jets pick. I thought he would do anything to get up in that number 3 spot. I thought it was a leapfrog move going from 20 to 9, and then he was going to go from 9 up high to get the keynote player that he wanted. Somehow I just can't see that Mel Owens is the keynote player that Don wanted. But I think he did a good thing getting that number 1 next year.
It's Paul Zimmerman of Sports Illustrated, who has been with us all day long, giving us his expert commentary, as we have been getting, also from Oakland and also from our broadcast center as well. ESPN's live and continuous coverage of the 1981 National Football League Collegiate Player Draft continues. We'll be here until 6 o'clock Eastern, 3 o'clock Pacific time. To wrap things up, we'll be back with more after this word.
The Hilton's right across the street.
Let's meet back at the Hilton at 8.
Meet you at the Hilton at
I'm over at the Hilton. Come over.
5 minutes to get to the Hilton. I'm at the Hilton.
Let's walk over to the Hilton. I'll meet you later at the Hilton. You know the Hilton's got the best steak in town.
We'll be meeting at the Hilton.
Right around the corner from the Hilton. You check us all in the Hilton. See you at the Hilton.
Hey, I'll catch you at the Hilton.
I'm on my way back to the Hilton. See you there.
Taking care of business. Another reason why when American business hits the road, American business stops at Hilton. America's business address.
You can see the reflection of the very first Thunderbirds in every Thunderbird today. Yet the optional electronic magic, the plush interiors, tell you this is definitely 1981 and definitely Thunderbird, a remarkable driving environment. In a world of ordinary cars, the Thunder's still there. From the world of better ideas at Ford.
Let's step back in time now to about 10:30 Eastern Time this morning. We had projected fairly accurately, along with many other people around the sporting world, the first 3 selections: George Rogers to New Orleans, Lawrence Taylor to the Giants, and Freeman McNeil to the Jets. Let's now look at some of those other key selections from the top ranks of the first round. Kenny Easley, selected by Seattle defensive back. And Paul, this was not really a surprise. The best available athlete theory, either Lott or Easley, and the Hawks went with Easley.
Well, you know, I had a chance to talk to Chuck Allen at Seattle, and you're seeing Kenny Easley there, defensive back, and their preference was, first of all, defensive back. They needed a backup running back, which they got, and they also needed the defensive end, which they got. So they're, you know, Seattle went right true to form.
Right. Plus, of course, you can return those kicks for you, give you that extra added dimension on the offense.
Yeah, and they, you know, a guy like Kenny Easley, they're going to get an awful lot of mileage out of this man.
Okay, St. Louis, next after that, Bud Wilkinson went for E.J. Jr. You had many opportunities to see him this year, a stand-up college end, as so many of the linebackers that have been projected were, yet he's expected to play now a linebacker in the pros.
Well, he's got the thing that a linebacker must have, which is sensational speed. He's tough, but he can run with anybody, so there aren't any backs coming out of the backfield that he should not be able to cover, even though he may not be quite as quick as some of them will be. The Cardinals, of course, were concerned about getting some help at quarterback, and they had the good fortune to have Lomax still available when they got their second pick.
Speaking of quarterback, Rich Campbell then went to Green Bay. We were thinking about whether or not what the Packers' thinking would be, considering what Starr's needs were, considering, again, his contract situation.
That's right, but he did go for that future, even though he has 4 quarterbacks coming into camp. He went for Campbell, a guy who's going to do well for him. He has James Lofton, a pretty good receiver to throw to. They drafted a tight end later on, Gary Lewis from Texas Arlington, and he's going to help also. So Campbell was a good selection. And back on E.J. Jr., just quickly, I'm just happy that for the first time probably that the press in St. Louis predicted what the Cardinals would do, and that's probably the first time in recent history that
Sanity might be prevailing there. Next selection that was then made, Hugh Green waited 7 selections before finally the man who was the Heisman runner-up and the Lombardi Trophy Award winner was selected by Tampa Bay. Number 99, the freelancer from the defensive line. It's going to be an outside linebacker with the instinctness, but being not quite 6'1", Paul, that may have worked against him.
I think that was the problem. That's why I think that E.J. Jr. went ahead of him. But when you take a look at Hugh Green, you know, they have him listed defensive end linebacker. There's just no way with the kind of defensive college football runs that you're going to use a guy like that on the defensive line. He is definitely an outside linebacker, and he can cover very well. He's got a quick reaction coming out of the, you know, for a back coming out of the backfield to pick him up right away, and you can still hit him within that 5-yard period of time, so that 5-yard space. So he's not going to have any problem, I don't think, covering.
Despite what happened yesterday with Vince Ferragamo of the Rams signing with the Montreal Alouettes of the CFL, despite the offensive hole that might exist, Bud, the first 4 selections that the Rams made today were defensive, a couple of defensive backs, a couple of linebackers, and the first man they selected in this draft was Mel Owens out of Michigan, 6'2", 232. And there has been debate and will continue to be debate whether this was the selection that the Rams needed.
Well, I think that